Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Let Us Head Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Was Given Mutation Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. He was quirkless, he couldn't forget that, not without how much he was teased, bullied, and abused over it. Like right now, yet again being reminded of how worthless he was, like he'd forgotten or something. An explosion tore him from his internal monologue of all schools. He curled deeper into his desk chair, only to be thrown from it by scalding hands. I thought you learned by now. A foot slammed onto his chest. Shitty Deku, your shit beneath my shoe, less than an ant. Gasping, Midoriya distantly watched Bakugo explosively slap Midoriya's journal between his hands and throw it out the window, his cronies open. Bakugo called his goons, get your slimy asses over here. He growled. The IV drip of fear in Izuku burst into a flood. A look was shared between the bullies, sly miles growing on their faces. Bakugo lifted his foot and stomped down, driving the air from Izuku's lungs. He sucked in a breath, only for it to be driven from him again and again and again. Tears streamed from his eyes. Shoes were kicking him from every angle, everyone leaving another bruise for him to nurse. If you want to be a hero so bad, you better take a swan dive off the roof. Because this life is for me, and only me. Each word emphasized with another bruised rib. Eventually it stopped. Eventually. He whimpered, getting to his feet. One arm hugging his ribs, he shoved his work into his school bag. He limped down the stairs, slowly, each step awakening a new ache. He choked down a sob when he found his notebook, soaking wet and charred, hours of work ruined. He shouldn't be surprised by now. This wasn't the first time. Tears slid down his face, splashing onto the journal and mixing with the fountain water. He was on the roof. It hurt to go down the stairs, but it hurt even more to climb up them. Nothing would hurt anymore soon enough. One last step, onto the ledge. His small body was racked with sobs and bruises. It just didn't matter. If he stepped backward, what would await him? More bullying, more bruises and fractured ribs, more daily grind with no reward. Quirkless people didn't make it very far anywhere important. No more. He took a step forward. It was dark, like every star in the universe was swept from the sky, shoved in a bag, and thrown into the ocean. Midoriya felt warm. Wait, how could he feel warm? He was dead right. He remembered jumping. Looking down, he could see himself, uniform still dirty from middle school tennis shoes. There was no light, so he could see his skin was glowing. Just faintly, but glowing all the same. The blackness he stood in rippled, stardust capping the crest of each wave. So a voice, no, several spoke in rhythm, their words causing the black itself to vibrate. You took your own life. Why yes, Izuku stuttered, wiping the wet off his face. Suddenly he could see a glow in front of him. The black rippled again, the glowing stardust sparking off the surface of the inky blackness. A hand emerged from the surface, more hands and claws following it, clawing at the surface. Silently, it emerged, a pure white skull reflecting light from everything and nothing all at once. It was a skull feline in design, gargantuan moose antlers growing from it, a gold ring hung from each antler spike, a fan of ears sprouting from behind each side of the skull, ranging from deer to cat to rabbit, none human. Its body was cervidy in construction, a great many hands at the front and fewer legs holding it up, a long tail swishing behind it. Interesting, the many but one voices hummed. Izuku couldn't focus on any part of it, amazed at its appearance in every facet. Closing his eyes, he searched himself while its halo of eyes dissected him. He wasn't afraid, oddly enough. Maybe that had to do with the absence of a heartbeat. A hum reverberated through him prior to the voices speaking. What is it that you desire? They questioned. Izuku opened his eyes. Which eyes do I make eye contact with? I don't understand. He replied. In life, what is your strongest desire? They gently said. Izuku looked at his hands to become a hero. He murmured, well, that is certainly unattainable from where you are. Their eyes squinted at him. Because I'm dead. He quietly said. Yes, they affirmed. Izuku stood in the dark, ignoring the glow of the beast's inquisitive eyes and the glow behind his own eyes. Why am I here? His voice cracked. You have my blessing is why. I am no god your kind knows of, to simply say, I am new, relatively. With my blessing I offer you the chance to live again, if you so desire. Izuku wiped the tears from his eyes and looked up. I can see my mom. God, how could he have forgotten her? She would be destroyed once they found his body, paced on the sidewalk. Not any decent funeral for her closure. Her only son, dead, not by any accident either. Purposely by his own hand. She would blame herself, that bleeding heart. Yes, do you wish to have your blood flow and nerves spark again? I do. He choked out. Then you must make a promise with me. You will pursue your dream. You will work for it. You lost hope before, I saw. I will give you another chance at your dream. No matter if it changes, so long as you live to live as you want. Its myriad of hands stretched out. However, there is a trade-off. Izuku's heart that didn't beat somehow stopped. Well, what is it? He nervously gripped his shirt. For each life you life through, for in your line of prospect I expect we will be seeing each other again. More of my design will mark your skin. And since you have met me, your true form shall be within your grasp as you choose. It bent its forelegs and reached its hands forward to him. Will you accept my gift? Izuku took a shaky breath. Ripples spread from his feet, blooms of stardust spreading from each step. He reached a freckled arm toward the god's arm cluster. Yes, the arms clutched his arm in hand. Swiftly it ducked him under the surface of the black. Light filled Izuku's eyes. Electricity sparked his nerves. Hot blood flushed his skin. Truly he was being drowned in the essence of life itself. He was cold and sore. Opening his eyes he saw the sun. It felt like hours had gone by, but no time had really passed. He took a breath and another, getting to his feet and brushing off his clothes. Taking his backpack that he left by the fountain, Izuku left for home, for mom. Izuku decided he was not going to unpack everything that had transpired. Nope, that could wait until he'd gotten home. Shoes scuffing the concrete, he trudged home, leaving a trail of blood dripping from his quaking body. Luckily, there weren't many people around to see his state. Snaking a hand through his hair, he felt something hard and tall growing from his head. Moving his hand to the other side of his head, he felt another growth. Interesting. He pulled his hand from his hair, only for it to come back sticky and red. He ignored the strange stares from passersby and walked into the tunnel. He was almost through the pass when a grinding noise came from behind. Throwing a glance back, his eyes widened at the sickly green sludge surging out of the sewer and onto the sidewalk. A pair of eyeballs floating in the goo. What the F? Met Izuku's eyes. A gurgled voice resounded from the green waste. Perfect. All Midoriya could muster was a simple F. Before the sentient slime rushed him, pushing into his mouth and nose. No. He struggled against the slime. Hands, I have claws now. Uselessly cutting through the slime like jelly. Despair and adrenaline pumped through him. He just got back. He was going to keep living. He wanted to be alive. Midoriya's tears were suspended in the slime. Please God, no. His lungs burned. He'd been holding his breath for so long now. The villain, however, was going strong and squeezing itself into Izuku little by little. No, just a little longer, please. He couldn't. Izuku took in a lung of the villain's body, feeling it squirm and adjust itself inside him. Black creeped in on his eyesight. Good, at least he was blacking out. Then he wouldn't have to feel the villain squirming inside himself any longer. Through the thick gel surrounding his body, Midoriya, he could hear a muffled shout. Oh well, it's not like he could really die, right? His eyes closed. It was dark. He was wet and cold and sore. So he was alive. Something warm and soft hit his cheek. What? It hit his cheek again. Slowly, he opened his eyes. Blinking away the murkiness, Midoriya saw someone large and yellow. Blinking again, he shot up. All Might, he yelped, meaning to say more but being interrupted by a coughing fit. The large hand patted his back. Victorious smile and eyes bright. Midoriya gazed up, amazed. Do not worry, young man, for I have captured the villain. Midoriya wheezed. His favorite hero saved him. None other than All Might. He needed to ask, to hear the answer himself. All Might, I need tea. I really must be going, young man. You should go to the hospital to be seen for your injuries. Injuries, though. His hair and uniform were still caked in blood. I have a villain to transport. Do not worry, I already signed you book. All Might turned, already crouching to jump away. Before he knew it, Midoriya was being tossed around in the wind, frantically gripping his new claws into All Might's pants. Prickly grip growing tighter as All Might shook his leg. Sure, he wouldn't die if he fell, but Izuku didn't really want more animal features growing on him. He was tired and he was sore and he really wasn't in the mood to save the hole that pushed him to end himself, but he couldn't leave it be. Sue him, he really justcouldn't. He pushed through the crowd, his lack of presence allowing him to squeeze through the jostling bodies. Explosions sounded, followed by small splatters. Flinching, he burst out from the crowd and sprinted toward the villain who hours ago had almost ended him. That as if he was in Dable. Slinging his backpack off his shoulder, he chucked it at the vulnerable eyes of the slime villain. He could see the villain lose his focus for a second, just long enough for Bakugo to take a breath and for Izuku to grab Kaken with his rough clawed hands, a sucking sound coming from the sludge. Bakugo glared at Izuku, eyes lapping up every detail of his face and hands, all the while sparking of small explosions with his free hand. Have no fear. Izuku held on to Katsuki with a death grip. For I am here. A strong gust of wind surged around them. Bakugo returned Midoriya's death grip as the slime villain was sucked into the vortex and splattered further down the alley. The wind fell to a breeze. Izuku let go of Kaken's arm. Deku. Kaken growled, what the F is on your head? He lunged for Midoriya, only to be grabbed and dragged back by Kamui Woods. Izuku himself steered away to an ambulance by a firm hand on his shoulder. After a firm yet depreciating scolding and a lot of no, I'm not injured about his dried bloody hair, Izuku was finally going home to see his mom. The young god's words rang through Izuku's brain, battling for dominance with All Might's dismissal of Izuku's ability to become a hero. How could he pursue his dream when the #1 hero told him it was impossible? I guess I can still apply and see if Gened will take me. He scratched his head and newfound horns. Well, it wasn't a quirk, but maybe he could do something with it, just enough to be accepted. A gust of wind nearly bowled him over. Brushing his hair out of his eyes, Izuku looked up. None other than All Might stood before him. Izuku looked in the mirror, the condensation from his shower still fading. His curly green hair almost hid the antler, horn things poking out of his head. Baring his teeth, he had long canines, his hands were clawed, and his ears pointed. He could pass this off as a quirk, right? I mean, mutant quirks are usually apparent right after birth, but maybe he could slide by with some vague reasoning of, oh, I'm just a late bloomer. Yeah, that would do it. Maybe he could merge one for all with his new quirk, make people a little less suspicious. Izuku, honey, I'm home. Mom's home. Oh, he couldn't wait to see her, tears pricking his eyes. He'd been so close to losing her, no, to her losing him. Oh God, he would have to explain his not quirk. He took a deep breath. She couldn't know the truth. He can imagine the results easily enough. A quick trip to a physiatrist. Not that he didn't need the help, but he didn't want to burden Mom more than he had to. Another bill would just give them less time together and more stress. He practiced a smile in the mirror, a little pointy, but it would be okay. Slipping on a bright shirt with a skateboarding dog graphic with text that said sick as a dog, Izuku traipsed out of the bathroom and made for the living room. Padding into the living room, his eyes immediately contacted his mom's. A soft gasp coming from her, and he averted his eyes. Oh, Izuku, what happened to you? She ran to him, holding his hand and ruffling his hair with her other hand. He sniffled. I think it's my quirk, Mom. It wasn't. Oh, Izuku, congratulations. It's nothing like I ever imagined. Do you know what it is? One of her hands trailing one of his black horns. He swallowed its What had the god said? Is true form. A transformation quirk. Wonderful, Izu. This it, or is there more? She was now rubbing small circles on his hands. I'm not sure. He really wasn't. That's okay, sweetie. To celebrate, we'll have katsudon for dinner. Celebrate? Celebrate what? Him not being quirkless. I thought it didn't matter to her. No and no. His brain was getting carried away again. Time to stop thinking. Okay. He had worse things to deal with, like how Kaken was going to explode when he saw Izuku's new features. Maybe he would be bullied less, and he would get to train with All Might tomorrow. Tomorrow would be better. Izuku, can you come help with dinner? And Ko called lovingly from the kitchen. Yes, Mom. He leapt to his feet, eager to help her in any way he could offer. He was in class. Bakugo was in class. Together, Midoriya was nervously tapping his pencil against his journal while his free hand was near drawing blood from his calf, even through his cotton pants. Bakugo's red eyes bore into him from across the room, not even bothering to face the white board. The bell rang. They both sprung up. Izuku was faster, backpack already ready to go. He heard him angry Deku from behind, not directly behind him, but not distant enough. Izuku turned a hallway corner. He wasn't going home today. He decided he would just go to the beach and do his homework there. If he could lose Kaken in the hallways and leave the school from the opposite exit he usually used, then there wouldn't have to be any confrontation at all. A sound like sparklers came from a hallway over. Another corner turned. He basically leaped down the staircase, and he was sprinting out the glass doors. Soreness be damned, he was getting the ever-loving shit out of him again. He lay in the sand, his workout clothes covered in grime, sweat, and sand. All Might tossed him a water bottle, which he immediately slammed, and lay down again. Excellent work today, young Midoriya. It may not look like you accomplished much, but it is progress nonetheless, and you can only grow from here. He ruffled Midoriya's hair assuringly. Thank you, All Might, Midoriya mumbled, face growing red. You're very welcome, Midoriya. May I ask you something? Izuku perked up. Of course, All Might. What is your quirk? You neglected to mention it, beyond saying it was useless. All Might inquired. Izuku's heart skipped a beat. Rubbing his neck, he explained, it's just a minor transformation quirk. I'm pretty sure this is the extent of it. All Might hummed in acknowledgement. Well then, as a part of your training, I would like you to push your quirk to its limit also. If this is something more personal to you, then you may do this in your spare time. I personally find meditation to be helpful. He patted Izuku's back in emphasis. Thank you, All Might, Midoriya stuttered. I'll try my best. He smiled up at All Might's tall form. Thinking nothing of Midoriya's fangs, All Might simply smiled back. Not his hero smile either, a genuine warmth lighting his smile. Midoriya was sitting on his bed in silence. Mom had come home and they'd had dinner, watched a movie, and she'd gone to bed. So Izuku was now sitting on his bed, crisscross applesauce, and meditating. Gently reliving his memories of his death, Izuku pondered the information the young god had given him. A transformation. If the small antlers, claws, ears, and fangs were anything to go by, he could maybe strengthen his animalistic attributes, maybe temporarily add more to his body. Okay, so meditation. He sat and sat and sat some more, and goddamn, this wasn't working. His overanalyzing brain kicked into gear. So far the only connection he had to whatever he was given was that god. Contacting a god. Alright, that's a start. So Uma's shrine. Right. But they had said they were a new god, so any shrine around his house was definitely not going to suffice. You could make a shrine, right? Yeah, people did that all the time, so candles, bowls, vases, a housing for it. Ugh, he didn't have the money for any of that. But surely the god was watching him, so they wouldn't mind if it wasn't as traditional or fancy as the average shrine. A short while later he had collected some small saucers, scented candles. For a housing he was using his closet, and as an offering he chose some leftover katsuden. I hope this isn't too unprofessional or offensive, he thought. Sitting down in front of the shrine he began to meditate again, calling to the god silently. It was dark and quiet and warm. Izuku opened his eyes to the total darkness. A faint static covered the black now. Not the black and white static you would see on a TV, but the fine multicolored pinprick static of rubbing your eyes too hard. He looked down at his glowing skin. His recent mutations seemed to have carried over. The static black rippled knock knock, the many voices called. Knock knock. Was the god trying to make a knock knock joke with him? Hesitantly Izuku called out, "Who's there?" "Hatch." The voices called out happily. A smile crawled onto Izuku's face. "Hatch who?" The bony muzzle of the god rose from the pool of black static. "Bless you." The young god's many eyes squinted in delight. The voices chuckling filled the abyss pleasantly. "What brings you to me?" they asked, bringing their arms out of the black to rest on the surface, reminding Izuku of someone lounging on the edge of a pool. "Well," the god's ears focused on him, "my mentor asked me to strengthen my quirk. Well, the blessing you gave me that he believes is a quirk. And just, how can I actually do that? Oh, and is there an easier way to contact you, or at least a way you prefer?" Izuku rubbed the back of his neck under the many stares of the god. The god flicked a few ears in thought, resting its antlered head onto some of its hands, gold rings glinting in some hidden light as they did so. "My blessing to you is something you can access whenever you so choose. It is in your blood, bone, flesh, and the electricity in your nerves. You must merely focus on the feelings of such in your body to become your true self." The god snorted, shaking its heavy head. "As for contacting me, well, what you did was very thoughtful and the gift very tasty, but wholly unneeded. I am not a god of personal wealth. I embody the life and death of the universe. To reach me you only need call to me with your heart. And do not worry. No time passes in this place." Izuku nodded, taking mental notes of it all. He looked up and nodded. "Oh, okay, I'm ready to try touching your blessing." He smiled nervously and closed his eyes. He could feel his heart, hear his breathing, and the warm black against his skin. He tried focusing on those, but his grasp kept slipping, his focus never still. He sighed and opened his eyes, looking to the god. The god lowered their head to him. "It seems you need assistance. Please allow me." They touched their head to Izuku's chest. An ethereal zap flowed through his body. Like adrenaline on steroids, he could suddenly feel everything. The heartbeat in his fingertips, the warmth in every muscle to move, the air in his lungs, every movement of his body. "What you feel now is what you have always felt but have become accustomed to. To use my blessing you must truly focus on being alive." The halo of eyes looked at him kindly. "For you are meant to live, do not forget that, and so long as you truly want to, I will let you live. Now focus on that, and pull." Izuku felt the feeling of all his body new and pulled his hands into it like a cold spring. He felt a cool and pleasant sensation fill him. Opening his eyes he met the gods. Their skull cracked open in a smile. "Very well done, little green one. Look at you. Beautiful. You truly are." Its voices cheered him on. Looking down at the black sheen of liquid glass, Izuku could see his glowing reflection. Midoriya doesn't know about beautiful, but he sure did something. His baby antlers were now grown to full size for a juvenile deer, I assume. He had a long snout with large fans, an eye centered on his forehead and two more on each side of his head, framed by a pair of raccoon-like ears and a set of deer ears. His build was similar to a wolf in regards to the legs and body. However, a ridge of muzzles crested his back like a wave that slowly sank into his spine, each a set of hands to them, firmly clamping the muzzles shut. Lifting a front hand like paw, he could see a deer hoof took the place of the paw pad. His fur was mostly a gray-green until it reached his long red panda-like tail, where it was mostly striped in gray tones and white at the tip. A fine dust shimmered across his entire body, so fine it was hardly noticeable. "Wow, thank I owe you so much," Izuku exclaimed, tail swishing happily. "How am I talking around all these teeth?" The gods sat their head back on their hands, proudly watching Izuku from their abyssal mirror pool. "What are you thanking me for? My blessing only gives you body to the ability to make its true form. The shape and nature is truly dependent on yourself. Your form will change and grow with you. Do not be frightened of those changes. They signify your growth and maturity." Izuku nodded at their words. "Thank you for your help. May I return to my world now?" he asked. "Of course you can. It was up to you this entire time." The many hands waved him goodbye, and so did his own many hands. Awkwardly, Izuku scratched his neck with one of his back's hands. "Well, thank you. Again. Ooh, see you around." He nervously smiled. He gripped the feeling of his true body again, snapping back into his own body. The shift carried with him to his real body, but he quickly grasped his human form. Sitting in the quiet, in the dark, he smiled to himself. Midoriya was tapping his pencil. Kaken was staring at him. Again, his yellow backpack was ready. Again, without moving his head, Izuku slid his eyes over to Kaken, seeing that his backpack was also ready. Very nice. Very cool. Kaken was close to the door. Izuku was next to the window. Now Izuku hadn't tested his claw's strength, but he just had to scale from the 3rd floor down. Easy enough. He quietly unlocked the window, eyes not moving away from the board. The bell rang. Izuku slammed the window up, threw his backpack on, and backed out the windows. He could hear desks being slammed to the sides and yelling from multiple students. Probably Bakugo pushing through everyone and everything to get to Izuku. Slowing his panicked breathing, Izuku moved his hands away from the window ledge, slowly going hand by hand down the brick wall, plenty of pores and cracks for him to grab. Just above the 2nd-story window, a blonde head stuck out of the window. Deku. Kaken's head disappeared only for a leg to be thrown out the window. Shit. Izuku clenched his teeth and clambered a few feet down. Bakugo now had his other leg out the window. Looking down, Izuku decided that just 1 story was close enough. Pushing himself off the wall, he landed in a crouch before stumbling into a sprint. A cluster of explosions sounded behind him. Bakugo's feet hit the ground. Stop effing running, Deku. Bakugo yelled, 2 small explosions adding to his speed. No, Izuku yelped, turning an alley corner. You don't even know what I'm gonna do to you. Another explosion. Izuku could feel the heat from it. Oh, I have a good idea. His voice cracked. Izuku turned a sharp corner, already halfway up a fire escape ladder by the time Bakugo turned the corner. Come down from there. Izuku kept climbing, pulling himself onto the building's roof. Adrenaline and fear did wonders for endurance. Panting, he yelled down to the boiling blonde. No, why not? His red eyes were slits and his teeth were bared. Because you're gonna kick my ass. Bakugo exploded. Izuku yelped. He'd never been roof hopping before, but what could wrong really? He ran to the roof edge, aiming for the next building's fire escape. Latching onto the railing, he scrambled onto the little balcony. Without hesitation, he began running up the stairs 2 at a time. This building was taller. You know I hate heights. Bakugo was also climbing the fire escape now. His screaming tinged with something else, not quite fear, but not something Izuku could place. Midoriya reached the rooftop. Running on steam at this point, Izuku stood on the point furthest from the escape. Only moments later, Kaken stumbled onto the roof, looking green. Between panting breaths, Izuku spoke, I can keep going. Or you can stop. Izuku clutched the stitch in his side. Kaken growled in return. Well then, you tell me what the F happened to you. His raspy voice snarled. I got my quirk okay. You and me both know that you're quirkless. That mutation quirks like what you've got don't just appear out of the blue. Bakugo seethed. Midoriya clenched his fists. It's my quirk. He lied and I'm going to be a hero. Better than you could ever be. Standing straight, he looked into Bakugo's eyes, unblinking. Bakugo screamed shit. Izuku backed up to the ledge, looking down. I quote LFing and you. Midoriya stepped off the ledge. Wind rushed past him and he landed with a crunch. Katsuki watched the green-haired nerd drop in complete shock. He wouldn't really just jump, would he? Jolting himself forward, he carefully walked to the ledge, holding onto the lip as he looked over into the alley. Eyes flicking rapidly around the dark alley, he didn't see the nerd, or blood, or really anything. Deku, he croaked, but he did hear something. Breathing softly, he heard a muffled "oh, damn soda can." That green piece of shit was alive. Looking down, he tried to pinpoint Deku's location. His eyes caught movement in a dumpster. Deku grabbed the sides of dumpster and rolled himself out of it, shaking a banana peel out of his hair. Finished brushing himself off, Deku looked up at Katsuki, a sharp smile glowing on his face. Leave me alone. Deku shouted with a giggle, turning around and jogging away. Katsuki, mouth agape, watched Izuku disappear down a side street. No less angry or confused about where the F Deku got off faking a quirk with some shitty prosthetics. Young Midoriya, Eve arrived. All Might greeted him, standing up from his seat on one of the beach's stair steps. Yes, sorry I'm late, something came up. Izuku rubbed his neck. He had changed into his workout clothes in a store's restroom as to avoid questions about weird stains or smells. All Might smiled down at Izuku. Before we begin training, have you made any progress with your quirk? Izuku thought back to his transformation. That was no quirk, and he could never hope to pass it off as one. No, not so far. He nervously smiled up at the thin man. Patting his back, All Might consoled him. Don't worry, I'm sure you'll figure something out. Now, let's begin. Izuku was laying in his bed on top of the sheets with his arms crossed and propping up his head. He slowly tuned into the hum of his body, trying to tap in just enough to grow his antlers or a tail, just something, but not everything. Eyeing his hands, he saw the claws thicken and the center of his hands become rough and hard. Jumping up excitedly, he hopped to the mirror. His black antlers had grown some, branching into 3 prongs instead of the single nubs. His eyes seemed greener than usual, and he could see claws poking through socks, his ears forming into something a mix of deer and raccoon. Hopping from foot to foot, he danced into the hallway. Mom, come look, Mom. A warm hand slapped him on the back. Made any progress with that quirk of yours, Midoriya? Izuku grinned wildly. No. He answered happily, like a liar. A little confused by Izuku's contradicting words and attitude, All Might flashed a thumbs up. Well, I'm sure you are trying your best, so keep up the hard work. Izuku covered the tug of guilt in his stomach with a smile on his face. Let's get to work, why don't we? All Might clapped a hand on Izuku's back, guiding him to the beach. Izuku stood on the roof of his apartment building. Looking down over the edge, he ignored his habitual suicidal thoughts and looked up instead. The moon was waxing but nowhere near full. Scanning the sky, he picked out a few stars fighting the glow of city lights. Breathing deeply, he hopped off the ledge onto the roof and walked to the center. Clenching his fists, Izuku slowed his breathing and felt for the river in his veins and the lightning under his skin. With a rush of wind, he felt his bones lengthen and reshape. Things popped and cracked, but instead of pain, which he had expected, it just felt like he was stretching after a long nap. Blinking rapidly, he looked down his snout at his paw hooves. Turning in a tight circle, Izuku saw his form was like it had been in the young god's realm. Shaking out his fur, Midoriya scanned the horizon. Near his apartment building, there were several other rooftops of around the same height. Sniffing the breeze, Midoriya picked out the smell of evening coffee and ramen shops carried by a wave of salty sea air. Backing up, Izuku took a running start at an adjacent building in the direction of the breeze. Landing heavily, he continued. He couldn't risk training in this form in the daylight, so leaping from rooftops was as good as his balance and endurance training would get. And even while running, he could test just how good his hearing and sight were. The bell rang and Izuku slowly shrugged his backpack on, hissing as the weight tugged on his sore muscles. The classroom was slowly filtering out. Izuku had seen Bakugo at the front of the crowd, but somehow that wasn't reassuring. He rubbed his eyes, carefully avoiding his claws, and shambled to the door. Sleepwalking through the hallways, he regretted the thought of trudging through sand carrying oddly shaped heavy objects. Like cupboards, who just throws away an entire cupboard? Softly grumbling to himself about cupboards and gross garbage bags full of what might have been food at some point, Midoriya failed to notice the furious blonde stalking him. Around halfway to the beach, just past a very nice-smelling ramen shop, Izuku was furiously shoved down a narrow alley. He started, cut off by a fist slamming into his gut, pushing the wind from his lungs. Wheezing, Midoriya jumped back. Clutching his stomach, his eyes met Bakugo's glare. Bakugo's hands popped as he stepped closer. You are even more worthless than I thought. If you thought for 1 minute that you're any stronger. Even if you have a quirk, you are still the same fake shithead who half-asses everything in his life. Izuku took another step back. What do you mean? He stammered. Hero this, hero that. Have you ever tried anything? Community service, working out, acing a single effing goddamn test. No, and then you think you can just apply like that's all it takes. You gave up a long time ago and it should have stayed that way. You think you can just effing swoop in and steal my time in the spotlight. Bakugo spit at him and surged forward. Heat bursting in his face, Izuku slammed into the alley wall, rough brick scratching his palms and back. You better learn this time. Bakugo met Midoriya's eyes. Izuku could see something hurt deep down in that crimson, but it didn't matter because he was only ever going to push that onto Izuku. An explosion sounded, chased by a fist cracking into his neck. Gagging, Izuku thrashed, kicking Bakugo away from him, scrambling toward the alley entrance. A thrumming boom echoed down the alley and Izuku began sprinting, his lungs burning, battling against his throat that just would not open up to the air. Sliding over a parked car, Izuku pelted across the street, gauging how far behind Bakugo was. Or, he would have made it across the street if weren't for the speeding car that happened to rip around the corner into him. Belatedly, Izuku could hear a handful of screaming. From brakes or people, he wasn't sure. He was sure of how cold he was feeling. The cold just pooling below him until it swallowed him whole. His eyes were open, but all he saw a blackness stooping over the world. He was warm, and it was familiar, the kind of warm he was, sort of, all-encompassing and reassuring. Izuku didn't bother opening his eyes. He rolled onto his stomach, groaning. He felt a ripple of energy flow beneath him. You're back. Izuku simply raised a hand in acknowledgement, letting it fall after the god hummed in response. The many voices chimed, that boy hurt you, did you let him? Izuku rolled over and eyed the god. No, their voice warbled, I think you did. Izuku glared. No, I didn't, he said with a bit of spite leaking into his voice. The god quietly approached him. I think you did. I think you believe what that strangely explosive boy says. Izuku said nothing. He said you didn't try. He curled in on himself. However, I have seen you try every day of your life. In the eyes of a human, especially one given good opportunities at the start, you have not done much. But you struggled through life for a long time. And I truly believe you tried your hardest. But I didn't. Izuku burst. I never stepped forward or really aspired. I gave up in the end. I didn't even know it, but I never thought I was going to be a hero. Tears burned his eyes, leaching out. He rubbed his face on his sleeve, not daring to look the god in the eyes. He felt the god's warm fur envelope him, a single arm rubbing his back. Nonsense. You try every single day. What are you doing now? You are training and growing, and even when you thought you lost all hope, you chose to try again. Your life is precious, Izuku Midoriya. It is precious because it is you, and you are the only you who is you. The world will be changed greatly by you. I see it because I see all. And I see that you simply living is the most wonderful thing anyone could ask for. Izuku sniffled. Oh, okay. He stammered through a swollen throat and runny nose. Izuku stayed curled up in the god's arms, focusing on his breathing. Minutes passed, maybe hours, but time really didn't pass here, did it? So, he could stay like this, just for now. Izuku bit his lip. Thank you. The many voices quietly asked him, would you like to return now? He sighed. Yes, but first, what is your name, or what should I call you? The god's ears flicked and its head tilted for a moment. Finally it spoke. There was once a human who fought the gods. She rid the world of the ones she found troublesome and uncaring for their creation. For you are in a sense, all our children, but we are also yours. When humans will something enough, it comes to be in a way. So when she cleaned our dimension, she left space for new gods to be birthed. That is how I was born. I was born unnamed, and I shall remain so. I am sorry if this doesn't appease you, but I am the base essence of life. Izuku picked at his clawbeds a little dejectedly. Oh. The god squinted at him. However, you may call me whatever you want. I will understand what you mean. Okay. So nicknames. I'll try to think of some later. Are you ready? He hesitated. Yes. He was cold and wet and sticky. Opening his eyes, he saw a frantic man crying as he struggled to leave his car, Bakugo mouth agape on the sidewalk, and several strangers running toward him. While Midoriya had processed his death and being hit by a car and stuff, only seconds had passed for all these people. Groaning, he blinked the blood out of his, much to the shock of everyone who had to bear witness to his bloody car crash. He felt his tendons creak as he stood up. Rolling his neck, he thanked some bystanders for their helping him and asking he was okay. Must have nicked an artery is all. Brushing himself off, he comforted the driver, not something very easy to do. Checking his watch, Midoriya jumped. He was going to be late at this rate. Deku. Izuku ignored his heart palpitations and picked up a jog. All Might would be waiting. Ah shit, he needed to clean the blood out of his hair and find a way to explain his evolved appearance. All Might would take it as quirk progress right. Just a rough try on drawing the god right. Midoriya locked the bathroom door and swung his backpack to the floor. A coffee shop's bathroom was the closest shower he could find on the way to the beach. Leaning against the cool tile wall, he shut his eyes, a headache simmering behind his eyes. Everything was just so bright. And he didn't have the energy to even think about going to a hospital for a possible concussion. Cracking his eyes open, he glared at the tile, its gaudy orange ceramic and white grout pattern burning into his eyes. He snorted and brought himself back to reality. Squinting at his phone, Midoriya shot All Might a quick text about doing work after school real quick, an excuse that would just give him enough time to clean up. Izuku ducked his head under the sink faucet's warm water, guiding his hands through his hair and rubbing his face, scraping off the crusty blood sticking to his skin. With pink water draining in the sink below, Midoriya finally dared to gaze at his reflection. The first thing to draw his attention was his eyes. They were dilated to an extreme degree, large pupils standing out boldly against his entirely rippling green eyes. Not an unnatural color, but as green as a new tree leaf. He reached a hand up to pull his eyelid down. Only the slimmest ring of white visible beyond the green. No wonder the dim bathroom lights were assaulting his eyes so violently. Rough light reflected off his hand. What? He didn't have scales. Is that what they were? Yes, deep reddish brown. Black scaling plated his hands and sluggishly crawled up his forearm, fading into skin before his elbow. Odd, his other self didn't have scales. Flipping his hand over, he found his palms rough and near black, small soft raises indicating pads on his fingers and around the center of his palm. Resting his hands on the sink, Midoriya again looked up, taking in his juvenile antlers honestly. I'm not even surprised. They branched 2 prongs further than before and ended in piercing points. His ears were pointed and carried a little fur with them on their venture upward, almost triple the length of his human ears. Begrudgingly he felt them, soft and nice, but he would miss his ears, the real ones that didn't seem to twitch every time his shirt fabric brushed against his skin. Baring his teeth, he saw more points than before, as expected. Sighing, he rubbed his face, choosing to ignore the roughness of his palms contrasting his soft finger pads. Glancing at the time on his phone, a tremor of shock whipped Izuku into action, quickly exchanging his uniform and binder for loose workout clothes. Rinsing and wringing his uniform to prevent too much staining, he could sew the rips later. Slinging his backpack on, Izuku rested his hand on the doorknob. staring down the man in the mirror, his jawline sharper than he remembered, chest flatter than he had remembered it. He shouldn't be angry with his body. He chose this. He chose it. By God, was he not going to regret the choices he'd been given? Ignoring the dripping black voices in his head, break the mirror and slit your throat, you should have finished it off. Coward. Midoriya left the orange-tiled bathroom behind. Salt-laden air stung his nose, a cacophony of soft waves lapping and tearing at the shore accompanying the invasive smell of rotten salt. The golden hue basking the shore spoke differently, as if it knew the beach still held beauty. Izuku hoped to say the same soon. A tall silhouette stood by the beach's steps. Izuku picked up his pace to a light jog. Growing closer, his eyes saw through the sun's glare. All Might's face holding a gentle smile that reached his eyes. Returning the smile, Izuku rubbed his hands nervously. So I think I made progress. All Might patted him on the back energetically. It seems so, young Midoriya. Do you have any better control now? All Might asked. Scratching his scaled forearms, Izuku busied his eyes with watching the sun glint of the hard keratin. No, I think it just does what it wants. He chuckled. I mean, it truly did do whatever it wanted. Of course, it did depend on him in some abstract way, but there was really no controlling his disaster brain. These excuses would only run so far. He needed to find something a little more flexible and lasting than, oh haha, I don't know how to use this quirk because it's actually not a quirk and I got it a month ago. Oh wait, maybe being a late bloomer would save his ass here. Izuku threw up a finger, which might be because I've only had this quirk for a few weeks. I've been quirkless up until now. Izuku brought his hand back down and resumed wringing them, ignoring the soft rubbing of the keratin. All Might's eyes widened. Izuku finally able to see the bright blue of his eyes outside of the shadow of their sockets. Midoriya, you should have mentioned earlier. No wonder you have no control or skill with it. That's quite all right, young Midoriya. You lack the experience someone else would have from birth. I understand if you do not make progress anytime soon. Until you feel comfortable with your new quirk, we will just pursue your strength training for now. You will just have to flex that unused quirk of yours. Like a muscle, it has to be trained. Midoriya nodded, let out a sigh of relief, glad that All Might had accepted the explanation, which was true, but also just a really well-founded lie to explain his mutations. Thank you, All Might. All Might chuckled and Izuku looked up. Please, we know each other well enough by now for last names. Please call me Toshinori. And well, it would be strange for you to be calling me All Might in this form in front of others, wouldn't it? Midoriya nodded in return, a wavy smile crawling onto his face. Looking down, Izuku's eyes caught on his watch. Letting out a strangled yelp, Midoriya jerked his head up and met All Might's eyes. We have 2 hours to work out. Let's go. All Might jumped at Izuku's sudden volume but nodded and watched Izuku race down the stairs and frantically begin piling microwaves and broken bookshelves toward the stairs. Mom, I'm home. Izuku slid his backpack across the floor, slipping his shoes off. Walking into the kitchen, Izuku heard the padding of socked feet. The hallway light cast shadows across the room, but Izuku could see his mother's face perfectly. Izuku, welcome home, sweetie. A light smile creased her face, forest green eyes appraising him, catching on his face and arms. Seems your quirk is growing. We'll need to go shopping for bigger shirts, won't we? Maybe some new shoes and socks too. His mom said playfully, pointedly looking at Izuku's feet. Looking down, Izuku saw that his toes had become clawed at some point and ripped holes through the socks still somehow clinging to his feet. Izuku blushed. I am sorry, Mom. He knew she didn't make enough to just go splurging on new clothing for him with the upcoming UA tuition. That is if he got in. An oily voice in the back of his head crowed that he wouldn't. Enko shuffled pasting him and began pulling pans out of the cupboard. Izuku, honey, you're trying to become a hero and growing into a strong young man. I don't care about the cost of a few socks and shirts. I want to see you succeed. Locking eyes, Izuku saw a proud shine in her eyes so bright it pushed the dark voice out of head. Now would you like to help make dinner? I found a new recipe we can learn. Soon they were both quietly working in tandem. Izuku had showered and changed into clean, loose-fitting clothes without socks. Enko was stirring a mix of vegetables and rice over the stove while Izuku cubed tofu carefully. The knife slid softly through the faux meat and made a soft grinding noise against the wood. Izuku focused on tofu, still unused to the sight of his dark-scaled hands. Suddenly he stilled, quickly throwing a glance back at Enko and seeing her absorbed in her task. Izuku lifted the knife and lightly pressed it against the scales. Glancing under the knife's edge, his scales remained untouched. Increasing the pressure little by little, his scales stood firm, impervious to sharp objects. Izuku decided and continued to cut the tofu. They had eaten dinner and packed the leftovers for both of their lunches tomorrow and now stood side by side cleaning the dishes. Izuku washing them, for the scalding water didn't get through his scales, and Enko drying and placing them to the side. Izuku bit his lip. He should tell her. He would. Breathing in deeply, Izuku decided now was as good a time as any. Continuing to wash dishes, Izuku spoke. Mom, I have something I've been meaning to tell you. Enko took the pan he had scrubbed and began drying it. What is it, Izuku? I've been training with someone to become a stronger hero. I know it's not going to study at the library like you thought, but I've been careful, and I would like you to meet him. That is, if you're okay with him training me." Izuku paused his washing, nervously waiting for her answer. His mom picked up a cup and continued drying with an old rag patterned with apples. "I wish you had told me sooner. I am a little mad about you lying, but I want you to tell me these things. I don't care how careful you are. What if you had suddenly disappeared without a trace, or were found dead in an alley?" Her voice was strong, nearly as strong as the grip she held on the dried glass in her hands, but it carried anger and grief with it, with the imagined loss of her son. Izuku flinched at the fact that she really had lost him, if for only a few seconds, but he had died. Inko set the cup on the counter and leaned on the sink's ledge. Letting out a sigh, she spoke again, this time in a soft yet firm voice. "Yes, I need to meet him if you are going to be spending so much time with this stranger. And you better not keep anything from me again, Izuku. We're all we have for family. We need to stick together. Do you understand?" Izuku let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "I understand." Inko stood up to her full height again and patted his shoulder, reaching up. "Good. I love you, Izuku. Now let's finish up. What would you say to getting some matcha?" She smiled. Izuku let his hands unclench beneath the soap bubbles and began scrubbing a cup again, a warmth spreading through him. "That sounds nice. Love you." The doorbell rang and Izuku jumped off his bed. "I got it," he called to his mother, carefully running down the hall on the pads of his feet to avoid scratching the hardwood flooring. Frantically sliding to a stop in front of the door, Midoriya fixed his shirt and tugged on his binder, nervously patting his hair down before opening the door with barely controlled excitement. All Might's tall and gangly figure stood awkwardly with a small bouquet of plum blossoms. He was wearing nice clothes that hung on his body slightly. "Good evening, young Midoriya." Izuku beamed and stepped to the side. "Toshinori-sensei, tea, please come in." Toshinori nodded and ducked into the house, bending over to carefully placing his shoes by the wall. Straightening back up, Toshinori pointed to the bouquet. "Where should I?" He trailed off as Inko came into the hall, treading lightly in her white socks. "Please, allow me to take those." She paused. "Toshinori." The man filled in her for her, holding the flowers out for her to take. She took the flowers and one hand gently touched the petals with the other. "Well, thank you for these, Toshinori-san. They are very beautiful, and also thank you for taking my Izuku under your wing." With that, she led the two into the kitchen, the dining table already set and the stew dinner being kept warm on the stove. Izuku fetched the curry and rice, ears picking up the sound of his mom setting the flowers in a glass vase on the living room coffee table. Returning to the square table, the trio took their places, each on a respective side of the small table with Izuku between Inko and Toshinori. As Izuku spooned each of them a sharing of curry and rice, Toshinori spoke up. "Midoriya-san, I would like to be completely honest with you now to assure you of your son's safety with me. I am a pro-hero." Inko looked at him quizzically. "That skinny of a man, a hero? Which hero would that be?" she asked, curious at what quirk he may have resting under his thin frame. Toshinori shared a nervous glance with Izuku. "It would be easier for me to show you." Toshinori scooted his chair back from the table slightly and burst into steam. Quickly the steam faded, revealing the broad-shouldered and bulky All Might the modern world knew. Belatedly, Toshinori had explained his injury to Inko and returned to his skinnier self. Conversation had been stiff but slowly relaxed as the two adults discussed Izuku's quirk and strength training. Eventually, All Might brought up transferring his quirk to Inko, much to her surprise. This then brought them to discussing Izuku's future at UA. Izuku tucked himself into his meal and let them piece together meal plans and exchange numbers. The sun had dipped below the horizon by now and the orange hum of city lights could be seen outside. Toshinori had thanked them for the meal and helped clean the table before departing for the night. Finally, Izuku relaxed. Dinner had gone over surprisingly well. Re-entering the kitchen, he began helping Mom pack the leftovers and clean the dishes. They performed the chore in silence for a few minutes before she softly spoke. "So, I certainly wasn't prepared for that." "All Might, huh?" Izuku handed her a plate, a flowered pattern circling it. Well, yeah, you know that day the slime villain attacked. The day I got my quirk." He saw her nod out of the corner of his eye. All Might thought that was really, heroic of me. And so he found me on my way home and offered me his quirk. Izuku heard her softly release a breath. "My son, training under the All Might. Izuku, you amaze me each day. That being said, you still should have told me about what you were doing after school, even if it was training with All Might." Izuku nodded and plunged a cup into the hot water. "I know." That night Izuku went to talk to the god. He had noticed some changes with his body that were uncharacteristic of the usual transformations his quirk caused. Calling out to the friendly god, Izuku soon found himself in the endless black plain. The darkness fizzling like carbonated soda, it only seemed to be static like when he meditated. Unlike when he died, and the darkness was quiet and calm. The god's head surfaced from the black ocean, floating towards him. Looking closer, Izuku could see the god's body below the surface. The arms curled in as the main legs and larger pair of arms paddled the body through the black. "Hello, green one. How fares the waking world?" Izuku scratched his neck. "Pretty good. My mom met my tutor and they get along pretty well, I think." The god slowed its doggy paddle and lounged on the edge of the black. Edge of what exactly? Sparkling dust dripping of their body. "You mean that bright yellow man, do you not?" The voices chirped. "Yes, but that's not really what I came here to talk to you about." The young god cocked their head curiously. "I've noticed Izuku's face reddened slightly, "that I'm growing hair. Not like fur or anything but arm and chest hair. And my voice is getting deeper. You're a juvenile, aren't you?" "Well, yes, but this kind of puberty isn't usual for my SX." The god suddenly perked up. "I understand what you mean. As you know, your transformations are dependent on yourself. And as you know, you are male while your body is not. Your ability has shifted your body so it will begin producing what is the name for it? You humans have a word for it." "Oh yes, testosterone. Your body will only change as much as you want it to and within limitations. Nothing of yours can be removed, only altered to an extent that you are comfortable with." "Does that answer your question?" Izuku looked up shocked at the god. After a short minute he closed his gaping mouth and answered the god. "Why, yes." He paused and scratched his neck, the feeling of smooth scales reminding him of another question he had. "Oh right, my arms. They're scaled now." "Yes, it seems you picked up the scaling a pangolin might have, as you are a mammal and can only receive mammalian traits. You subconsciously chose them, so I cannot answer as to why you grew them, but I can only guess it has to have been from that explosive boy, since the scale's growth coincides with your most recent death and encounter with him." "Oh, okay. Well, thank you for meeting with me. I'll be going back now, I guess." "A pleasure, my child," the many voices sang. Izuku was looking at the ceiling. Blinking his eyes rapidly, he switched the lamp of and mulled over his thoughts in the dark. Eventually his thoughts faded into the background as sleep overtook him. "Now, eat this," All Might said, gingerly holding out a golden strand of hair. Midoriya's excited bouncing abruptly stopped. "What?" Toshinori dropped his hero form, shadowed eyes meeting Izuku's. "You need to ingest some of my DNA for the quirk to pass on." "I am sorry, but..." Hair seemed the least strange. With a nervous glance at his watch, Izuku grumbled a small blood would be better, as he dropped the hair into his mouth, squeezing his eyes shut as he struggled to swallow it. Finally he managed it, wiping his face off. Toshinori gave him a small thumbs up. "Congratulations, young Midoriya. You now hold a great power and destiny within you. I would say more, but you need to get going for your exam. But before you go, I'm afraid I won't be available for the next few weeks as I will be teaching at UA," he announced with a grin. Izuku passed through UAS gates, slowing from a decent jog to a brisk speed walk, his red sneakers quickly appearing and disappearing in his periphery. The shoes had been mostly intact when he had gotten home, so he had just glued in new soles. After carefully trimming his claws, Izuku had then gone to a thrift store and found a cheap pair of sneakers he didn't mind for later use. Those sneakers now sat in his backpack amongst his favorite pens and a packed lunch. Absorbed in his thoughts, Izuku missed a ledge of uneven concrete and quickly tipped forward. Midoriya only managed a quick thought of "can these antlers break?" before a crisp yet solid slap was felt on his shoulder. With a stupid look on his face, Midoriya stared at the concrete that should have skinned his nose. Above him he heard a feminine voice, "Sorry for that, but I thought tripping would surely be bad luck." With careful hands she rotated his floating body upright and touched her fingertips together. Izuku's mind raced through all the uses of her quirk, from creating better environments for healing bones to the detainment of villains. Had she ever considered medical work? She could be anyone amazing asset to the industry as a support hero, with her being able to move civilians with spinal injuries or otherwise. Once again stuck in his thoughts, Izuku lost the chance to thank her as she waved a hand and departed with a good luck. Ripping himself free from his entangled thoughts and queries, Midoriya tensed his jaw and hurried to the school's new arrival lobby. Eyes quickly adjusting to the dark room, Izuku could easily pick out an empty seat. Ignoring his anxiety and Bakugo's glare, Izuku quickly tucked his backpack under the chair and sat down. He hoped the person behind him could still see. He was short, but his antlers were at least a foot tall. The lights dimmed further, but Izuku could easily see the shifting crowd and the movement of someone approaching the stage at the edge of its curtain. Practically glowing the stage lighting, a mohawked man reminiscent of a cockatiel flung himself onto the stage with a dramatic flair. "How we doing today, everybody?" Izuku's ears flicked at the noise, but his eyes brightened as he recognized the pro hero. Izuku shuffled his feet, listening to his scales softly click as he nervously rubbed his arms. The group of students he had been divided into was standing in the shadow of the tall walls surrounding the training area. Idly flicking an ear, Izuku evaluated his competition from the tall boy who had singled Izuku out. Engines in his legs. Probably a speed quirk, a girl with long hair that looped around her limbs, hair control or reinforcement, and she's using it as bracing. Until finally his eyes landed on a girl with brown bobbed hair. Izuku fidgeted with his claws for a moment before taking a step toward her. He never thanked her this morning. A hand clasped around his arm and Izuku froze, sweat beading at his neck. Stop right there. Izuku glanced back, seeing that it was the boy with robotic and exaggerated movements. Were you planning on disrupting that girl's concentration to lower her chance of success in the upcoming test? The boy chopped his hands down furiously, aggressively pointing toward the girl and back to Izuku. Midoriya's ears nervously flicked back and his eyes couldn't focus on anything but the angular face of the boy. Not that wasn't. Izuku tried to defend himself. Distantly he could hear the crackle of speakers kicking on. Abruptly the boy let go of him and Izuku quickly brushed of the encounter and listened to the eccentric hero on the speakers. Let's start. Wait, was that it? Did he miss a countdown or something? Before Izuku could ask another competitor what present Mike had said, the metal doors swung open on silent hinges. Wind rushed past him and pointed elbows jabbed him as Izuku frantically tried to slip into the rushing crowd. Izuku's claws scratched the concrete as he ran. He had ended up toward the end of the quickly dispersing crowd. Panting, Midoriya picked a road that he hadn't seen anyway go down. Skidding around the corner, his ears moved on their own and directed him toward the sound of scraping metal and electrical humming. Okay, giant robots. Giant robots run on electricity. Electricity will shock him. He didn't feel like dying today, but it's not like UA would make it so easy for kids to die, right? Right. Throwing caution to the wind, Izuku climbed the side of a small building, listening to the robot on the other side. Izuku crouched beside the roof ledge and glanced over the side. Positioning himself, Izuku vaulted over the ledge and onto the robot's head. His claws crunched into the metal as the robot spotted another student and scuttled forward. With the machine-occupied, Midoriya picked his way over to its neck joint. Rearing back a fist, Izuku plunged it through the rubber. Blindly grasping for wires, here goes nothing. Clenching his teeth, Izuku ripped the wires out. Sparks rattled through his arm and down through his leg. The robot tumbled down and Izuku landed running, ears steering him away from combat and toward the unoccupied robots in the depths of the city. Izuku punched through a red glass eye. Grabbing the camera inside, he twisted and tore it from its socket. The robot crumpled like a dead spider and Izuku leaned against a wall, panting. Brushing the glass of himself, Izuku's breath suddenly caught. Ears pitched and straining toward distant noise. Eyes widening, Izuku picked out yelling, overlaying deep rumbling. Izuku would have brushed it off as a group having trouble with a larger three-pointer or something. But in a lull of movement, Izuku heard a call for help. With only 6 blocks to cover, Izuku was there in under a minute. He could feel his pupils expand as he took in the sheer mass of the robot in front of him. Eyes focused on the threat ahead, Izuku ignored the panicked students fleeing. Focusing on his hearing, he picked up the shifting of rubble and a feminine cry for help. Ripping his eyes off the machine, Izuku spotted the form of someone stuck under slabs of sheetrock. Hurtling forward, he focused on the burn in his heart and pulled it. Bracing his legs, Izuku took a flying leap and brought his fist back. Level with the robot's head, he thought back to All Might. He said, "Clench my butt and yell right." Focusing on his burning muscles, he slung his fist forward, carrying his hopes on it. A concussive wave of air blasted the robot back. Busted metal and glass sprayed outward, some cutting into his face and chest. Midoriya could feel gravity slowly taking over. He could feel himself cartoonishly float for a moment before his descent began. The robot in front of him tumbled backward, still being moved by the energy of his punch. Well, he thought with only slight panic seeping into his marrow, I guess I'm going to die again. UA wouldn't let that happen, right? Turning himself over in the air, Izuku watched his doom rise to meet him. Slap. Izuku blinked, mostly from the slap, but also from the realization that the rough concrete was no longer threatening to skin and break him. Movement drew his eyes. The brunette meeting his eyes with a queasy smile before touching her fingers together. Izuku let her slowly lower him with her quirk. They stayed like that for a moment. Izuku pushed himself up and shuffled to the girl. Seeing her green face, Izuku quickly leveraged the sheetrock slab of her body enough for her to slip out. The brunette slid out and fell to her hands and knees, retching up whatever lunch she'd had. Hesitating for a moment, Izuku crouched by her side and held her hair out of her face. While doing so, he took stock of his limbs, a grinding pain and blazing fire in his legs and arm, the limbs he had run one for all through. Looking at his legs, Izuku sighed at the ruined sweatpants. Looking closer, he saw fur bleeding into the scales. A quick look at his arm revealed the same. I didn't die, so nothing physical should have changed. However, All Might did say OFA might blow all my limbs off, so they should rightfully be damaged. Perhaps my blessing also helps enforce and heal my limbs in its own way. Izuku pondered. Patting the girl's back as she finished puking, Izuku helped her to her feet. Izuku could hear the sound of someone approaching, directing his eyes. He saw a small woman in scrubs and a coat, a cane tapping along with her footsteps. I'm Midoriya, by the way. Thank you for helping me this morning, Izuku said warmly to the nauseous girl beside him. She began lifting her head but must have thought better of it as her eyes returned to the concrete. Muration, it was no problem really, she said sleepily. You did me a greater favor than I did for you anyway, so I guess I'm the one in your debt now. She chuckled, Izuku lightly joining in. Moving toward Recovery Girl, the two found a piece of rubble to sit on. Wait for her as she tended to another wounded classmate. Letting a sigh out, Uraraka spoke. So, how do you think you did? She asked charismatically. Midoriya's ears flattened and he ran a hand through his dusty hair. Honestly, I am not sure. I only took down a few robots and those were mostly one-pointers. Uraraka's mouth fell open in shock. Only a few points. But you took down that 0-pointer in one punch. The boy's dark eyes fell and he didn't answer, just rolled his shoulders. Uraraka twiddled her fingers. Would you like to exchange phone numbers? The beastly boy seemed to perk up at that, large pupils fixating on her. That sounds great. The small boy blushed slightly and his small smile revealed fangs. They both wrote their numbers on each other's arms and attempted a conversation, but both found they were too tired to carry it. Uraraka wrapped her arms around her stomach and ignored the sting of her cuts. She heard Midoriya scratch his palms next to her. She looked over at him. The animalistic boy was slowly rubbing his palms again, his long fluffy ears that stuck out of his mop of curly green hair angled backward but occasionally flicking to Recovery Girl. Midoriya simply nodded as Recovery Girl told him the side effects of her quirk. With a simple kiss on the boy's forehead, the fur on his limbs faded away, but not the scales or antlers adorning his head. Strange. Midoriya was surely tired from the kiss, so why didn't he let the rest of his quirk go? It had to be some kind of transformation quirk if the fur could come and go, and not a mutation quirk. She would have to ask him later. Izuku sat on the cold cement of his apartment rooftop, the setting sun warming his back. OFA was supposed to blow off all his limbs or at least break something. But for some reason it amounted to a burning sensation in his flesh. Focusing on the glowing fire in his chest, Izuku pulled back his fist and threw it skyward. He squinted his eyes as air rushed around him and effectively cleared the roof of dust. As the blasting wind faded to a breeze, Izuku looked at his arm. Again dark gray. Green fur had sprung up where his scales ended, the fur traveling up his shoulder and under his binder's strap. So his blessing took in damage then. Curiosity overpowered his self-control and Izuku brought a claw to his stomach, drawing it across with enough pressure to draw blood. Almost instantly white fur sprung around the cut and the blood flow stopped, skin sealed. And just like that, his cut was fully healed. Izuku wiped his hand on his pants and picked up his hero journal, carefully thumbing to a mostly empty page at the back with his own name on it. So far the page only covered the god's blessing on one side with small sketches, while the other side of the paper had his observations of OFA that he had found during the UA exam. On the blessing side of the paper he added advanced healing with additional mutation and enforced body structure. Setting aside his journal, Midoriya brought out his phone and swiped to the camera app. I should have enough light. Popped out his case's kickstand and pressed record. Now that he was done with his plus ultra rigorous workout routine, he could finally study himself to a fuller extent without sacrificing sleep. Taking a few steps back, Izuku focused on the aches of living and the drumming of his heart. A breeze swept past Izuku, rustling his fur. Popping open his eyes, Izuku observed himself. His front legs faded from dark fur to ruddy scaling. Doing a lazy shuffling spin in front of his phone camera, Midoriya dipped his head into the camera's view. Returning to center, he stepped toward the camera, using it like a mirror. Flicking his numerous ears, Izuku decided one more spin and some speaking attempts would catalog his form well enough for the time being. Squinting against the sunlight, he spun again and with a sharp smile announced, "Have no fear, for I am here." He couldn't help but let out a chuffing laughter. The soft click of a door behind him. Izuku froze, head whipping around. A bedraggled woman in sweatpants with a lighter and cigarette stood in the open door, issuing a soft but emotional "What the foo?" Izuku moved slowly to not alert the woman, eyes never leaving hers, using the arms on his spine to grab his phone and notebook. The character in the door also moved slowly, like she wasn't trying to spook him. Izuku took a step back. She brought her phone to her face. Izuku took another step back, ears haloing him as they all pointed to the woman ahead of him. A line of static hissed from her phone. A quiet voice spoke and his large ears heard a clear hello. "This is 110. What is your emergency?" All five eyes widening, Izuku jerked back, whipping around and pelting to the roof edge, aiming for the next building. Shit. Why did something always have to go wrong? Murphy's Law, dumbass. Of course something went wrong. Of effing course. He pelted onto a lower rooftop, directing himself toward a quieter district. Breathing evenly, his ears swiveled frantically in search of threat. Police sirens echoed in the distance, but the city is large and busy. There's no telling who they're chasing, or what for that matter. In the twilight, Izuku could see the sharp blue and red lights mixing to purple as they violently flew down streets like dyed lightning. Feeling guilty and afraid, Izuku flattened himself against the roof and let his ears trace the path of the police siren. The sirens faded into the distant city sounds, and Izuku let his ears relax, a stinging ache in their supporting muscle. Shaking his fur out, he let his various arms scratch some itches and slunk along the roof in the direction his home was. To make it home in time, he would need to stay bestial and change back a few blocks from home. Picking up a trot, Izuku took in the nightlife lights and scrabbled up fire escapes and leapt from ledges, working through the maze of shop roofs. Between car screeches and drunk laughter, Izuku heard something else, hard whispers promising violence and a muffled whimper. Among the scent of garbage and spilled beer, Izuku's twitching nose picked up the acrid smell of copper. Quietly padding closer, he veered toward the conversation. Slinking across the gaps between ledges, he discovered the source. A man in a fine silk suit. The fabric rippled as the man shifted his hold on something. No, someone. Izuku's gleaming eyes saw the sharp gleam of metal pressed against the throat of the shadowed victim. Izuku froze, eyes dilating like a stalking tiger. With precision steps, Izuku brought himself closer and paved a route down to the pair. A dull scraping of bone in his tail alerted Izuku to a new change, long finger-like claws sprouting from his tail's end. Smothering his curiosity, he gently lowered his upper body from the roof, the claws on his tail gripping the ledge and allowing himself to walk down the wall some. Looking at the pair again, Izuku met the victim's eyes over the criminal's shoulder. Purple eyes met green in the victim. A boy around his own age, Izuku realized, opened his mouth. Whether he was going to warn his assailant or scream didn't matter as the knife pressed to his throat, bit into his skin, and red droplets dribbled from the knife's edge. Fear pulled in the boy's eyes, and he met Izuku's again, a pleading essence stirring within them. Blinking slowly, Izuku dropped to the ground behind the knife's wielder. Izuku brought his main arms forward and easily grabbed the assailant's own. Ignoring the gasp from the man, Izuku gripped his arms and yanked the man back. Hearing the dull clatter of the man's knife, a pair of Izuku's spinal arms blindly thumbed his password into this phone and dialed 911 to his best ability while he pinned the man down. Leaning his weight forward onto the man's shoulders, looked at him, cold and confused fury meeting his many eyes. Movement above him had Izuku watching the purple-eyed boy with wild hair take a few shambling steps toward the alley's entrance before slumping against the wall and sliding down it. Finally coming to the realization that Izuku would not be letting him go anytime soon, the man began screaming. "Let me go, you big ugly bastard. What the F are you?" So first off, ouch. Second off, Mom had said he was very handsome. Chuffing, Izuku spat back, "Well, you aren't much of a looker either." Silence. And then, "What the F you CK? It can effing talk. Someone help me." Unsure if the man had backup or not, Izuku stretched a spinal arm to his face, holding the phone close to his mouth. "Hello, police. I have apprehended a man. He was holding someone hostage with a knife." A calm feminine voice spoke up from the other side. "Was anyone injured?" "Yes, the victim had his throat cut. I don't think it's too deep." "And what is your location?" Humming thoughtfully, Izuku opened his Maps app and reported back to her between the Quick Yen pawn shop and the gas station on Oda Drive. "Stay put. Emergency services are on their way." With that, she canceled the phone call. Izuku tucked his arm behind his back again, the hot breath from one his muzzle streaking against it. Looking down at the criminal, Izuku asked, "If I let you go, will you run?" The man scoffed and spat at him. "What kind of dumbass do you take me for? Of course I quote I'll run." Sighing, Izuku shifted on his haunches and stood tall on his back legs. Lifting the man, he trudged over to a nearby open dumpster and dropped him. The man scrambled to the lid. F in Dumbas, he was cut off by Izuku shoving him in further and slamming the lid. Crimping the lid to make sure the man wouldn't escape, Izuku trotted over to the boy who had collapsed against the wall. He could hear his pulse beating steadily, but the cut on his neck was still slowly sleeping crimson that overpowered Izuku's nose. Biting back his panic, Izuku checked his surroundings and changed back to human. Vaguely, he heard his phone and journal fall to the ground beside him. Fumbling in his pockets, he pulled out a handkerchief. Silently thanking his mom, Izuku pressed it to the boy's wound and waited anxiously for the approaching police sirens. Izuku wiped his hands off on his pants and wrung his hands in his shirt. "Did you happen to see who it was that took down the villain? Were they a pro-hero?" Behind the officer, Izuku saw the criminal flail as another cop tried to put him in the police car. "Let me go. It's still out there." Izuku and the cat-like officer both flicked an ear and ignored the man's crazed screams. Eyes returning to the questioning officer, Izuku responded quickly, "No. I think they were a pro, but they must not have been a popular one." As if that mattered, Izuku prides himself on knowing all heroes, popular or not. "Though they did look busy. Or else they wouldn't have left me behind with the boy." Nodding, the officer wrote something down on his notepad and asked for a contact number from Midoriya. Izuku stared at the clock on his scratched phone screen. "Shit, 136 and 2 messages from Uraraka." He was surprised to find Mom hadn't called him, but then he remembered she had picked up another night shift. Feeling guilty, he tossed the phone onto his bed and cringed at the feeling of crusted blood grinding between his fingers. He needed a shower. and some dinner. Izuku had cleaned himself up, eaten, and gotten into bed, but evidently had forgotten the part where he falls asleep. Adrenaline had left his veins aching and bones heavy, but his oh-so-large eyes were left unfocused on the ceiling. He had saved a life tonight. He was a hero. The criminal's words echoed around his brain and rattled out an unpleasant feeling of guilt. Blinking, he rolled over and wrapped the blanket around himself tighter. Curling in on himself, Izuku ignored the voice saying he was only trying to be good, to make himself seem likable, to twist others around his fingers, to use people, to give himself a feeling of superiority. Surely that was it. If he had only ever tried to be a hero and not just a good citizen through volunteering. Bakugo was right. 330. Staring at the ceiling wasn't helping him any. It was just offering his brain more ways to dredge up old news to soak Izuku in guilt and dread. Sighing, Izuku shut his eyes and silently called Moro, and reached forward. He felt an odd rippling across his scaled arms as warm nothingness gripped them and pulled him through an Inkai nothing. Again he felt guilty. He was asking for attention just to make himself feel better. His green eyes snapped open and met the glowing white halo eyes of the god. Focusing for a moment more, Izuku saw that the white light split into an array of colors around the edges, much like a crystal would split sunlight. The god's head tilted as they released Izuku from their gentle grasp. Moro. Izuku scratched his neck. Why yeah, do you like that name? It's from an old movie and the character kind of reminded me of. Well, you. Lowering their head onto their numerous elbows, the god's pelt shimmered with distant stars. He would have been awed at the comparison, but the god reminded Izuku too much of a gossiping teenager for the effect to stick. Moro does sound nice. Thank you, Green Bean. Do you see? I also made you a nickname. Giving themselves a small chuckle, the god moved on. But what movie? Also, what is a movie? The questioning cadence of voices made Izuku giggle. Sitting down crisscross applesauce on the fizzling blackness, Izuku began explaining. The concept of movies was fairly easy to explain, however, the explanation of the movie and choice was not as easy. Growing frustrated with his own inability to recount the movie. He hadn't seen it in 5 years. His ears flicked forward with an idea. Really, you should just watch it. Is there a way you can do that? Scratching an ear, the god hummed thoughtfully for a moment. I suppose I can bring aspects of your world to mine. What will we need? Oh, a TV, DVD player, and a copy of Princess Mononoke, the Ghibli film. Maybe some snacks if you want to go wild. Izuku's eyes cracked open. He was in his bed, sheets tangled between his legs and sunlight casted through the window to highlight sections of his poster-plastered walls. Untangling the blanket from his horns, Izuku sat upright. Last he remembered, he was with the young god, Moro, for now, watching a movie. He must have fallen asleep leaning on Moro's warm flank at some point. Hopefully they had finished the movie without him. Oh my god, I just had a movie night with a god. Gaping, Izuku stared at the floor, starstruck. Never in a million years did he imagine meeting All Might. And this he had never even thought about. What? Shit. He somehow also committed vigilantism last night. What the effing F was going on with his life? The muffled clanking from the kitchen shook him from his stupor. Blinking, Izuku forced himself to stand up and get dressed and help Inko with breakfast. Sliding his phone in his pocket, Izuku decided Uraraka's messages could wait till after the meal. Drying his hands off, Izuku pulled his phone out and ventured to the couch. Inko had already left for her first shift and wouldn't be back till lunch before leaving for her night shift. Falling onto the couch like a Jenga tower, Izuku read through Uraraka's texts. Unknown number. Hey, this is Uraraka. 3. Unknown number. How do you think you did on the written exam? Green dude. Yoems. Green dude. And if it's Gashobio. God MFing claws. Izuku grumbled, pulling back a finger to carefully finger peck. He needed to trim his claws again. Not his fault they grew back at extreme speeds. Green dude, it's me, the one and only Izuku. While waiting for her response, Izuku fiddled around with her contact information, making her profile picture one of a Nerf gun. Uraraka, NJ Sauce LMAO, having a hard time Taio Ping. Green dude, JAKDKSO. What's RHAT? Uraraka, damn it. Green dude, TH3 turns have TW Violet. The turns have tabled. Letting out a humorous chuff, Izuku rolled off the couch, and after a momentary contemplation of the consequences of just staying on the floor and taking a nap, Izuku stood up. He had to, of course, or else he would miss the coffee date he had set with Uraraka. How are you alive? Izuku took another sip of his hot vanilla bean coffee. What? Uraraka squinted at him and playfully grimaced. There's 3 whole-ass espresso shots in there. 5 actually. Her eyes bore holes into Izuku's flesh. You're a monster. Shoving down his reactionary guilt, Izuku opened his eyes as wide as they would go and locked eyes with Uraraka. Without blinking, Izuku took one long drag from his highly caffeinated drink only to be blinded from a bright flash. Rubbing his eyes, he looked toward Uraraka. Giggling, she turned her phone screen to him. Her giggle turned into a cackle as Izuku gaped at the picture. Izuku's comically wide pupils had illuminated bright white that shifted in color like a cat's eyes. Careful, Midoriya, you're going to blind someone with your high beams. Izuku smiled and felt his ears flick. He hadn't really internalized that his animal features were visible to others, that they were permanent. Uraraka quickly sent the photo to Midoriya and said it is his contact picture. His antlers were cut out of the picture, but his reflective raccoon eyes were recognizable. Oh yeah, you never said what your quirk is. She could practically hear the boy's brain stall. His ears turned slightly back, eyes turning to his drink like it was a cure to some mysterious poison he had drunk. Well, it's an animalistic transformation quirk. Uraraka clapped her hands together. Oh, so I'm guessing the strength is factored in with your animalistic qualities. The boy's brows furrowed as he opened his mouth to reveal large fangs. I guess so. Uraraka kicked herself. She hardly knew him and already found a sore spot. Anyway, what do you do for fun? A small smile grew on her face as a bright light perked up in the boy's eyes. The afternoon sun cast a green glow through the trees. Midoriya's green hair and fur seemed to glow in the light. Uraraka's gaze watched the ears of the strange boy flick and twist with the sounds around them, stray hairs catching the light. Despite the nervous posture he held and his constantly roving eyes, Uraraka could feel an air around him, something deep and calming, but in a constrained and dark manner, as if he was holding something back. However, Midoriya's calming air dissipated like a dandelion in the wind as his antlers caught in some low-hanging branches. Not noticing, he continued walking forward until the branches yanked him back. Again that deer caught in the headlights look. Snickering, Uraraka reached up and untangled the branches from his antlers. Kinda impractical, aren't they? Midoriya scratched his head and offered a toothy smile. I guess so, huh? Uraraka leapt at the opening, curiosity overriding her usual filter. Is there a way you can control them? Like their appearance and location? He flinched and his ears flicked and he began scratching his arms as he spoke. No, I can only control the extent of the transformation. However, I believe it is a subconscious choice, so maybe someday I will be able to actually control it. The deep green of his irises flared emerald in a patch of sunlight, black hole pupils staring into Uraraka. Uraraka's perpetually blushed face practically blinded Izuku. Wow, that's so neat. She looked like she was holding something back, but Izuku was glad for it. He knew that his ability could be taken as a quirk, but he wasn't quite comfortable with showing it off to others yet. Memories of his late-night escapade traipsed through his mind as the two continued walking. A soft silence fell between them, and while not uncomfortable with it, Izuku still itched to fill the gap. So your quirk? Yeah, Uraraka happily responded. What are its limits? Izuku's eyes and ears focused on her. Izuku gently closed the door behind him and slipped his bright shoes off and placed them in their small shared shoe tray. Glancing into the living room, he could see his mom on the couch, her slowly rising and dipping chest warning him of her sleep. Padding into the kitchen, Izuku noted the sink was barren. She must not have eaten lunch yet. Pulling out the carton of eggs and some vegetables, Izuku popped his earbuds in, easing himself into making a bowl of steamed eggs. Setting a pot of water to boil, he chopped celery and carrots, mixed them into eggs and milk, and placed the glass bowl containing the mixture into the now boiling pot of water. With near 20 minutes to end, Izuku logged onto his online schooling account. In between Bakugo's ranting and venting, he really had gotten a point across. Izuku wasn't trying hard enough. So he and his mother had gone through the school and gotten into some online courses at a heavily discounted price. Currently, his courses consisted of first aid and sign language. Izuku felt that would keep him busy in between schooling and the slow startup days of whatever high school he got into. Propping his phone up on the counter, Izuku pressed record and began signing. Mom hugged him and slid her shoes on. Her hand on the door, she gave him the warmest smile imaginable and stepped out into the bright sun. Sighing, Izuku flopped onto the couch and played with his phone. Another hero had just been found incapacitated in an alley. Lately, a new villain had been appearing and trimming off the edges of the hero populace with a bloody streak. Most of his victims were found deceased, but a few made it through to the hospital. A few died in the hospital. Izuku nervously bit his nails and tucked his phone away to find something to watch on TV. Bouncing his leg, Izuku aimlessly flipped through the channels once or twice. Settling for some documentary on quirks and animals, Izuku checked his phone. No new notifications. Heaving a sigh, Izuku stared at the ceiling. He didn't feel like doing anything. He didn't want to do nothing, but nothing caught his attention or quelled his impatience. With nothing better to do, he called out to Moro. He breathed in, or he felt like he did. The black sparkling realm before him didn't have air so much as a feeling that it should. Turning a circle, Izuku spotted the glowing outline of the god, their form vastly differing from their previous encounters. The young god rose to meet Izuku, their glittering pelt a stark white with strange patterns shadowing it. Their body seemed to be more canine than previously, but retained the pair of deer legs moving in step just behind their forelegs and the rippling rows of arms on their neck and spine. I like the new look. The toothy feline skull smiled down at him, the god's halo of eyes shining warmly. Thank you. What brings you here this time? Izuku stretched his neck. To be honest, I didn't have anything else to do. but I am curious if there's any way to influence the features that appear on my human self. The god shook its neck of fur-out hands holding on tightly. I thought I told you already. Maybe that was one of the others. The god mumbled. Oh well, it's all subconscious, so if you really want something changed it would be difficult without a change of self-image or behavior. Why do you ask? My antlers keep getting tangled into things. Wait, what do you mean others? Moro directed Izuku's attention to the black mirror below them, his reflection fading into the image of a man with beastly features, wild orange eyes, and a scarred face faded to a Korean woman with tired features and fangs. Again and again the faces faded in and out. Each of these humans received a blessing from me. Izuku let out a hushed breath. Are any of them in Japan? The god chuckled, looking at the fading figures with remorseful eyes. No, the large majority of the blessed I have shown you were from thousands of years ago, and all but one has decided to move on. Any reason why you waited so long to bless someone else? He asked gingerly. The god's head swiveled toward him, candle-light eyes growing into beacons. Izuku opened his fanged mouth, catching the air to withdraw his question. The god halted him with a hand on his shoulder. Many of them were hunted, captured, and tortured, ended again and again until they can no longer become human. All that remains is their true form. Werewolf hunters were vicious in that age. I was barely 50 years old and had been very flagrant with my blessings. The god tucked their legs under themselves. As they spoke again, Izuku could hear some of the many voices quieting down, some angry, some sad, all in rhythm. I was too young to recognize the anger in humans, too gentle and kind for the world your kind created. So when one of the blessed came to me, they told me the truth. My blessing had become a curse. I decided then that until your world could accept the existence of change in this way, that I would wait for the hunters to die out. The god reached its hands to Izuku, voices calming down and coming together. I have waited a long time for you. You are the first werewolf to exist in centuries. Discounting the sole survivor, that lone wolf. A few of the god's ears flicked a distant look in the ethereal eyes. Moro let out a sigh. Wisps of smoke curled out of its skull, eerily seeping out from the eye sockets as well as the jaws and nose. As the smoke rose, it split into a flock of small birds that flew away into the depths of the black before blending in with the static of the realm. The two just lay there, the god's skeletal face unreadable, while Izuku was stuck in his head deciding what he should be chasing. The idea that someone could be hunting him down, or the fact that there was someone else like him living and hiding for thousands of years. Giving the god another glance, Izuku held one of their hands, gently saying, I think it's time I should go. The god merely clenched his hand and pressed its cool skull to his warm skin, electricity sparking through him. Gasping, Izuku clenched the couch beneath him and checked the time. Only 4 p.m. His hand slowly slid up his face and grabbed the lowest rung of his antlers. Izuku had cleaned himself up, eaten, and gotten into bed, but evidently had forgotten the part where he falls asleep. Adrenaline had left his veins aching and bones heavy, but his oh-so-large eyes were left unfocused on the ceiling. He had saved a life tonight. He was a hero. The criminal's words echoed around his brain and rattled out an unpleasant feeling of guilt. Blinking, he rolled over and wrapped the blanket around himself tighter. Curling in on himself, Izuku ignored the voice saying he was only trying to be good, to make himself seem likable, to twist others around his fingers, to use people, to give himself a feeling of superiority. Surely that was it if he had only ever tried to be a hero and not just a good citizen through volunteering. Bakugo was right. 330. Staring at the ceiling wasn't helping him any. It was just offering his brain more ways to dredge up old news to soak Izuku in guilt and dread. Sighing, Izuku shut his eyes and silently called Moro, and reached forward. He felt an odd rippling across his scaled arms as warm nothingness gripped them and pulled him through an Inkai nothing. Again he felt guilty. He was asking for attention just to make himself feel better. His green eyes snapped open and met the glowing white halo eyes of the god. Focusing for a moment more, Izuku saw that the white light split into an array of colors around the edges, much like a crystal would split sunlight. The god's head tilted as they released Izuku from their gentle grasp. Moro. Izuku scratched his neck. Why yeah, do you like that name? It's from an old movie and the character kind of reminded me of. Well, you. Lowering their head onto their numerous elbows, the god's pelt shimmered with distant stars. He would have been awed at the comparison, but the god reminded Izuku too much of a gossiping teenager for the effect to stick. Moro does sound nice. Thank you, Green Bean. Do you see? I also made you a nickname. Giving themselves a small chuckle, the god moved on. But what movie? Also, what is a movie? The questioning cadence of voices made Izuku giggle. Sitting down crisscross applesauce on the fizzling blackness, Izuku began explaining. The concept of movies was fairly easy to explain, however the explanation of the movie and choice was not as easy. Growing frustrated with his own inability to recount the movie. He hadn't seen it in 5 years. His ears flicked forward with an idea. Really, you should just watch it. Is there a way you can do that? Scratching an ear, the god hummed thoughtfully for a moment. I suppose I can bring aspects of your world to mine. What will we need? Oh, a TV, DVD player, and a copy of Princess Mononoke the Ghibli film. Maybe some snacks if you want to go wild. Izuku's eyes cracked open. He was in his bed, sheets tangled between his legs and sunlight casted through the window to highlight sections of his poster-plastered walls. Untangling the blanket from his horns, Izuku sat upright. Last he remembered he was with the young god, Moro for now, watching a movie. He must have fallen asleep leaning on Moro's warm flank at some point. Hopefully they had finished the movie without him. Oh my god, I just had a movie night with a god. Gaping, Izuku stared at the floor, starstruck. Never in a million years did he imagine meeting All Might. And this he had never even thought about. What? Sit. He somehow also committed vigilantism last night. What the effing F was going on with his life? The muffled clanking from the kitchen shook him from his stupor. Blinking, Izuku forced himself to stand up and get dressed and help Inko with breakfast. Sliding his phone in his pocket, Izuku decided Uraraka's messages could wait till after the meal. Drying his hands off, Izuku pulled his phone out and ventured to the couch. Inko had already left for her first shift and wouldn't be back till lunch before leaving for her night shift. Falling onto the couch like a Jenga tower, Izuku read through Uraraka's texts. Unknown number. Hey, this is Uraraka. 3. Unknown number. How do you think you did on the written exam? Green dude, yo emth. Green dude, and if it's hopio. God mfing claws. Izuku grumbled, pulling back a finger to carefully finger peck. He needed to trim his claws again. Not his fault they grew back at extreme speeds. Green dude, it's me, the one and only Izuku. While waiting for her response, Izuku fiddled around with her contact information, making her profile picture one of a Nerf gun. Uraraka, NJ Soscht LMAO having a hard time Tai ping. Green dude, JAKDKSO. What's RHAT? Uraraka, damn it. Green dude, TH3 turns have TW Violet. The turns have tabled. Letting out a humorous chuff, Izuku rolled off the couch, and after a momentary contemplation of the consequences of just staying on the floor and taking a nap, Izuku stood up. He had to, of course, or else he would miss the coffee date he had set with Uraraka. How are you alive? Izuku took another sip of his hot vanilla bean coffee. What? Uraraka squinted at him and playfully grimaced. There's like 3 whole ass espresso shots in there. 5 actually. Her eyes bore holes into Izuku's flesh. You're a monster. Shoving down his reactionary guilt, Izuku opened his eyes as wide as they would go and locked eyes with Uraraka. Without blinking, Izuku took one long drag from his highly caffeinated drink only to be blinded from a bright flash. Rubbing his eyes, he looked toward Uraraka. Giggling, she turned her phone screen to him. Her giggle turned into a cackle as Izuku gaped at the picture. Izuku's comically wide pupils had illuminated bright white that shifted in color like a cat's eyes. Careful, Midoriya, you're going to blind someone with your high beams. Izuku smiled and felt his ears flick. He hadn't really internalized that his animal features were visible to others, that they were permanent. Uraraka quickly sent the photo to Midoriya and set it as his contact picture. His antlers were cut out of the picture, but his reflective raccoon eyes were recognizable. Oh yeah. You never said what your quirk is. She could practically hear the boy's brain stall. His ears turned slightly back, eyes turning to his drink like it was a cure to some mysterious poison he had drunk. Well, it's an animalistic transformation quirk. Uraraka clapped her hands together. Oh, so I'm guessing the strength is factored in with your animalistic qualities. The boy's brows furrowed as he opened his mouth to reveal large fangs. I guess so. Uraraka kicked herself. She hardly knew him and already found a sore spot. Anyway, what do you do for fun? A small smile grew on her face as a bright light perked up in the boy's eyes. The afternoon sun cast a green glow through the trees. Midoriya's green hair and fur seemed to glow in the light. Uraraka's gaze watched the ears of the strange boy flick and twist with the sounds around them, stray hairs catching the light. Despite the nervous posture he held and his constantly roving eyes, Uraraka could feel an air around him. Something deep and calming, but in a constrained and dark manner, as if he was holding something back. However, Midoriya's calming air dissipated like a dandelion in the wind as his antlers caught in some low-hanging branches. Not noticing, he continued walking forward until the branches yanked him back. Again that deer caught in the headlights look. Snickering, Uraraka reached up and untangled the branches from his antlers. Kinda impractical, aren't they? Midoriya scratched his head and offered a toothy smile. I guess so, huh? Uraraka leapt at the opening, curiosity overriding her usual filter. Is there a way you can control them? Like their appearance and location? He flinched and his ears flicked and he began scratching his arms as he spoke. No, I can only control the extent of the transformation. However, I believe it is a subconscious choice, so maybe someday I will be able to actually control it. The deep green of his irises flared emerald in a patch of sunlight, black hole pupils staring into Uraraka. Uraraka's perpetually blushed face practically blinded Izuku. Wow, that's so neat. She looked like she was holding something back, but Izuku was glad for it. He knew that his ability could be taken as a quirk, but he wasn't quite comfortable with showing it off to others yet. Memories of his late-night escapade traipsed through his mind as the two continued walking. A soft silence fell between them, and while not uncomfortable with it, Izuku still itched to fill the gap. "So your quirk?" "Yeah," Uraraka happily responded. "What are its limits?" Izuku's eyes and ears focused on her. Izuku gently closed the door behind him and slipped his bright shoes off and placed them in their small shared shoe tray. Glancing into the living room, he could see his mom on the couch, her slowly rising and dipping chest warning him of her sleep. Padding into the kitchen, Izuku noted the sink was barren. She must not have eaten lunch yet. Pulling out the carton of eggs and some vegetables, Izuku popped his earbuds in. Easing himself into making a bowl of steamed eggs. Setting a pot of water to boil, he chopped celery and carrots, mixed them into eggs and milk, and placed the glass bowl containing the mixture into the now boiling pot of water. With near 20 minutes to kill, Izuku logged onto his online schooling account. In between Bakugo's ranting and venting, he really had gotten a point across. Izuku wasn't trying hard enough. So he and his mother had gone through the school and gotten into some online courses at a heavily discounted price. Currently, his courses consisted of first aid and sign language. Izuku felt that would keep him busy in between schooling and the slow startup days of whatever high school he got into. Propping his phone up on the counter, Izuku pressed record and began signing. Mom hugged him and slid her shoes on. Her hand on the door, she gave him the warmest smile imaginable and stepped out into the bright sun. Sighing, Izuku flopped onto the couch and played with his phone. Another hero had just been found incapacitated in an alley. Lately, a new villain had been appearing and trimming off the edges of the hero populace with a bloody streak. Most of his victims were found deceased, but a few made it through to the hospital. A few died in the hospital. Izuku nervously bit his nails and tucked his phone away to find something to watch on TV. Bouncing his leg, Izuku aimlessly flipped through the channels once or twice. Settling for some documentary on quirks and animals, Izuku checked his phone. No new notifications. Heaving a sigh, Izuku stared at the ceiling. He didn't feel like doing anything. He didn't want to do nothing, but nothing caught his attention or quelled his impatience. With nothing better to do, he called out to Moro. He breathed in, or he felt like he did. The black sparkling realm before him didn't have air so much as a feeling that it should. Turning a circle, Izuku spotted the glowing outline of the god, their form vastly differing from their previous encounters. The young god rose to meet Izuku, their glittering pelt a stark white with strange patterns shadowing it. Their body seemed to be more canine than previously, but retained the pair of deer legs moving in step just behind their forelegs and the rippling rows of arms on their neck and spine. "I like the new look." The toothy feline skull smiled down at him, the god's halo of eyes shining warmly. "Thank you. What brings you here this time?" Izuku stretched his neck. "To be honest, I didn't have anything else to do, but I am curious if there's any way to influence the features that appear on my human self." The god shook its neck of fur-out hands, holding on tightly. "I thought I told you already. Maybe that was one of the others." The god mumbled. "Oh well, it's all subconscious, so if you really want something changed, it would be difficult without a change of self-image or behavior." "Why do you ask?" "My antlers keep getting tangled into things." "Wait, what do you mean others?" Moro directed Izuku's attention to the black mirror below them, his reflection fading into the image of a man with beastly features. Wild orange eyes and a scarred face faded to a Korean woman with tired features and fangs. Again and again the faces faded in and out. "Each of these humans received a blessing from me." Izuku let out a hushed breath. "Are any of them in Japan?" The god chuckled, looking at the fading figures with remorseful eyes. "No, the large majority of the blessed I have shown you were from thousands of years ago, and all but one has decided to move on." "Any reason why you waited so long to bless someone else?" he asked gingerly. The god's head swiveled toward him, candlelight eyes growing into beacons. Izuku opened his fanged mouth, catching the air to withdraw his question. The god halted him with a hand on his shoulder. "Many of them were hunted, captured, and tortured, killed again and again until they can no longer become human. All that remains is their true form. Werewolf hunters were vicious in that age. I was barely 50 years old and had been very flagrant with my blessings." The god tucked their legs under themselves. As they spoke again, Izuku could hear some of the many voices quieting down, some angry, some sad, all in rhythm. "I was too young to recognize the anger in humans, too gentle and kind for the world your kind created. So when one of the blessed came to me, they told me the truth. My blessing had become a curse. I decided then that until your world could accept the existence of change in this way, that I would wait for the hunters to die out." The god reached its hands to Izuku, voices calming down and coming together. "I have waited a long time for you. You are the first werewolf to exist in centuries. Discounting the sole survivor, that lone wolf." A few of the god's ears flicked a distant look in the ethereal eyes. Moro let out a sigh. Wisps of smoke curled out of its skull, eerily seeping out from the eye sockets as well as the jaws and nose. As the smoke rose, it split into a flock of small birds that flew away into the depths of the black before blending in with the static of the realm. The two just lay there, the god's skeletal face unreadable, while Izuku was stuck in his head deciding what he should be chasing. The idea that someone could be hunting him down, or the fact that there was someone else like him living and hiding for thousands of years. Giving the god another glance, Izuku held one of their hands, gently saying, I think it's time I should go. The god merely clenched his hand and pressed its cool skull to his warm skin, electricity sparking through him. Gasping, Izuku clenched the couch beneath him and checked the time. Only 4 p.m. His hand slowly slid up his face and grabbed the lowest rung of his antlers. Izuku locked eyes with the dog through a chain-link door. The brown and white dog, Bobby, shook its head and huffed at him, pausing to wait for a response. I have no idea what you're saying, he deadpanned. The dog garbled something out in frustration. Having fun there, Midoriya? Izuku stood up, leaving Bobby behind to meet the eyes of the shelter's leading volunteer. Wavy black-brown hair brought back into a ponytail and baggy yoga pants traded for jeans. The woman, Miss Itagaki, was unmistakably the woman from his rooftop. By chance they lived in the same building and volunteered at the same animal shelter. Well, I guess it is the only shelter close to our building. A nervous grin warmed his face. Quenching his fear of recognition, he spoke up. Yeah, I've been thinking lately. What if my quirk will let me talk to animals? You know, cause of all the ears and stuff. Though, is it working? Bobby barked at them. Oh yeah, he just said he wants to pee on your boots. Izuku deadpanned. Itagaki looked down at the dog with faux anger. I bet he does. Don't need to understand him to know that. Snorting, he went over to the sink and scrubbed the dog's slobber and grime from between his scales and claws. See you tomorrow, she asked him. Flicking his ears back, he could hear her scratching Bobby's head. I'll be here every day until I get my letter from UA, or one of my backups. After that, I'll just come in whenever I have the time. Izuku dried his hands off and tossed his head back to call to the two. Bye. See ya, kiddo. Midoriya gently shut the kennel's door behind him. Checking his watch, Izuku hummed. He had enough time to make mom dinner before she got home. Shaking off a stressed dream, Izuku threw his hero-themed covers to the side and glanced at his clock. 4 o'clock already. He might as well get ready for the day. Izuku shuffled over to his dresser, not bothering to turn on the lights as he pulled out a pair of joggers and carefully pulled a hoodie over his antlers and ears. Tiptoeing down the hallway, Izuku slid on his pair of sneakers that basically screamed abused and smelly. Ignoring the way his toe claws seemed ready to finally tear the soles out, Midoriya smoothly slipped out of the door. Taking the stairs down, he tuned his phone into the Present Mic podcast on the lowest volume setting he had. Keen ears able to hear the loud blonde perfectly fine. Starting out with a light and relaxed jog, Izuku slowly tugged on the twisting warmth of One for All and let it seep into his legs, likening the flowing process like latching onto the outer edges of his monstrous form. He stumbled slightly as he felt the uncomfortable feeling of scales and thick fur catch and brush against his pant legs. Wind rushed past his hair and played with his ears as Izuku balanced himself out. Hopefully any onlookers would assume his speed was just a part of his mutation quirk. Yeah, that quirk he definitely had. Nervously clenching his fists, Izuku reined One for All back in, feeling the fur on his legs linger for a moment before receding into his skin, and then the tugging of scales on fabric disappeared. Letting out as much of a sigh as he could, Izuku refocused on where his runny O sit. He had already made it to the outskirts of the shopping district. Slowing his pace, Izuku glanced around, recognizing the cafe he and Uraraka had been at just the other day. Luckily, he had left the house early enough that the streets were clear enough for him to jog through without disruption, as only the barest handful of people were out on a Wednesday morning, most already at work or school, besides those with odd schedules. Thinking of Inko, Izuku felt a heaviness drip from his heart and pump through his blood. Lightly tossing his head, Izuku made to pick up his speed and head back home when he saw them. Across the street in a warmly lit building sat a slouched figure in loose clothes with a shock of indigo hair, golden eyes looking up from his phone to take in the sunrise. Slowly the other boy turned his head to take in the scenery. Before their eyes could meet, Izuku quickly continued jogging. Would he recognize me? Did he see that I was staring? God, I hope I didn't make him uncomfortable. Should I go apology OHSHITGRENLIGHT skidding to a stop? Izuku jumped off the curb onto the sidewalk, bare-bone traffic swiftly flowing where he had been about to run. Catching his breath both from the fact that he'd almost been hit by a car again and his run, Izuku patiently waited for the light to change. Placing his hands behind his head, Izuku briefly scanned the advertisements posted up and down the street lamp pole. Postings about lost pets, job availability, and volunteer opportunities battled for his attention with their bright fonts and stock images, art. Tapping his foot along to a new metal song Present Mic was endorsing Izuku's eyes, a calmly colored and plain poster requesting volunteer help at a cat cafe. Pulling his phone out, Izuku tapped in the address. He could always use some more volunteer hours. UA certainly required a lot. A red marker appeared next to his location on the digital map. Looking up and around, Izuku's wide eyes quickly catching on a store sign that matched the poster's listing, Cat Corral Cafe. Traffic slowed to a stop as the light changed, and Izuku quickly crossed the road without incident and approached the cozy cafe. Green eyes scanning the storefront, Izuku stopped in his tracks. Of course he was in this cafe. Sit. What are the chances he's recognized? Pretty low, right? Izuku turned off his podcast and pushed himself to grab the glass door's handle and enter. At least the other boy hadn't noticed Izuku's pause. Walking up to the counter, Izuku read the menu and took in the decoration of the small shop. Apparently it was a Western-themed cafe with cactus cat stands and pictures of the various adoptable cats with little cowboy hats on them. Chuckling to himself, Izuku ordered a small mocha with a few shots of espresso and nervously brought up the volunteering process of the cafe. The cashier gave him a short rundown of their volunteer hours and cycles, as well as an application for him to fill out. Since he was a minor, he would need his mother's permission as well. Thanking the cashier, whose quirk gave her rough and darkened hands, Izuku set himself down in a seat against the window. Checking his phone, Izuku was relieved to see it was only 5:30. He still had plenty of time to make mom breakfast before her first shift. Sipping his steaming beverage, Izuku jumped as several somethings brushed against his legs. Looking past his drink, he saw what appeared to be a cluster of cats vying for his attention. Setting his drink to the side, Izuku plunged his hands into the swarm of cats, trying to satisfy them enough to give him a chance to drink his coffee. While scratching chins and pulling cat claws out of his pant legs, Izuku felt the crawling trail of hair on his neck stand up stiffly. Jerking his head up, leaf green eyes met the rough gold of the other boy's eyes. Ears flicked back. Izuku focused his attention on the energetic cats, claws eliciting purrs from the slowly calming mob of cats. Over the dense mafia of purring cats, Izuku's regrettably large ears heard the boy state in a raspy but strong voice, "I recognize you." Sweat beaded on his neck and Izuku bit his lip. Looking up, he avoided the other boy's eyes. "You do." The purple-haired boy leaned over the back of the chair further, eyes narrowing. "You're that sludge villain kid, aren't you? The one who ran in." Izuku slumped forward in relief, cats pouncing at the opportunity to bat at his hair and lightly gnaw on his antlers. Brushing them off, Izuku sat up and looked at the teenager, ignoring the sound of cats clawing their way up the couch and onto his lap and shoulders. His canines brushed against his bottom lip as he lightly smiled. "Yeah, that was me." Golden eyes flicking to the pile of fur assaulting Izuku, he asked, "I've never seen you here before. Do the cats like you because of your quirk?" Midoriya mulled it over. He'd never seen All Might get attacked by cats, and up until now he himself had never been crowded by cats. It was probably the blessing in some odd way. "Ooh, yeah, I think so." Humming an acknowledgement, the other boy ran a hand through his hair before looking at Izuku again. "Do you mind if I sit next to you? You kinda stole all the cats." Lightly jumping, Izuku nervously replied, "Oh, of course. I'm so sorry, I didn't realize my quirk had this sort of effect on animals." "Well, I guess the shelter dogs do kind of like me, but I thought that was because I was new, not because." Midoriya stopped himself before he could ramble any further and scooted over on the couch. Sorry about that." Grunting a raspy "You're fine." The boy leaned into the couch and began helping Midoriya untangle the slowly calming mound of cats. The two sat in silence for a while, each slowly drinking their own coffee. Feeling significantly more calm since his company hadn't recognized him, Izuku spoke up. "I'm Midoriya, Izuku, by the way." A deep raspy voice replied, "Hitoshi Shinso." "Love you, Mom." "Love you too, Izuku." Bedraggled yet neatly dressed, Midoriya quietly closed the door behind her. Izuku sighed and collapsed on the couch, throwing on a quiet Netflix series. Already showered and fed, the green boy felt like a fat cat ready for a nap. Just as he was resigning himself to his sleepy fate, a scuffing sound from the doorway practically manhandled his ears straight up. Anxiously remembering Moro's warning of past hunters, Izuku pushed himself off the couch into a crouch. Slowly stalking toward the door, he peeked around the corner. A shadow hovered outside the door. More shuffling noises, and a small envelope jumped through the mail flap and landed on the welcome mat. Hungrily eyeing the envelope, he could see the bold stamp "Famous of UA." Holding himself back, Izuku waited for the mailman to slip away before skittering forward, bare claws lightly scuffing the floor. Pouncing on the mail, he quickly returned to the couch, paused his show and sliced open the packaging with deft claws. Jumping at the loud clatter of a round thin OHSHITAHOLOGRAMPROJECTOR. "For me." Izuku grinned wild. "Why, as he texted Uraraka a picture." "Space gay." "Oh, sit. You already got yours." "Green machine." "Yeah. UDIFNT. Space gay." "Wait. Space gay. Guess whose mailman is here." "Space gay." "Oh, sit. Space gay. Let's open them at the same time." "Green machine." BHIPRPJINADKN ASDF. "Okay." Dropping his phone on the couch, Izuku fumbled with the disc projector momentarily before finding the power button. Green Machine, you tried to give me your points. I got in BTW. Space Gay, you saved my frickin' life, dude. So did I. Green Machine, yeah, you also saved mine. In VMMA, call my mom. Space Gay, same. Frantically tapping on his mom's contact info, Izuku practically exploded when she answered. Mom, excuse my French, but you aren't gonna effin' believe it. Mom, tissues, handkerchief, notebooks. Mom, I'm going to be late. Pencils, pens, lunch. I packed some leftovers and a little treat. I hope you like it. I got it from this special deli down the street, and one of my coworkers said. Izuku interrupted. Mom, I love you and I appreciate you, but I'm going to miss the train. The two met eyes, cheeks flushed and eyes teary. The both of them hugged quickly. As Izuku grabbed the door handle, he heard a sniffle. Turning back to further assure, he was met with the blinding light of a camera flash. Oh, Izuku, she giggled, showing the picture to him. You look like a deer in the headlights. Well, you would more like a deer if your antlers had stayed. I do like your cute little horns though. My little devil bad boy. He arrested for crimes against my breakfast. I only burnt one egg. Inko's giggling only intensified as she took another picture. And oh, your hair and ears. Like a raccoon caught in the garbage can. My little raccoon. Oh, maybe we should get one of us together. Red in the face, Izuku jumped out the door before she could further pick on him and make him late. Taking in a deep breath, the feral teenager pushed open the extremely large door, which was apparently noise isolating as his bat-like ears were bombarded with ceaseless chatter. Flicking his ears back, Midoriya slipped through the door and frantically searched for an open seat, ignoring the erratic back and forth between a blue-haired square kid, who Izuku recognized as the one who had called him out at the entrance exam, and Bakugo. Treading lightly around the argument and various other students, Midoriya made for an open seat by the window. Blocking out the noise around him, Izuku focused his eyes on the ground as he swerved around a middling group of bright and chatty teens to slip into a desk behind a slumped form. Sliding his backpack under his seat, Izuku allowed himself to slowly take in his environment. Across the room, Bakugo was still bickering with the robotic boy. No writing was on the board, and it didn't seem like a teacher had ever even come into the classroom. Movement at the door caught his attention. A familiar brown bob haircut stepping in, raising his hand, Midoriya flagged Uraraka down. As she made her way through the crowd of excitable teens, Izuku glanced at the slumped figure in front of him, stray locks of purple hair begging the question. Itoshi. Itoshi grumbled and shifted. Yeah, Midoriya. Yeah. Uraraka collapsed into the desk next to Izuku's. So new horns, huh? Midoriya anxiously scratched his head, feeling the pointed nubs of goat horns, angled back with a slight twist. Yeah, my quirk does what it wants, I guess. You there, the green-haired boy. Izuku jumped, whipping his head around to face the loud yet proper teen. The boy's face softened as he extended a hand. I am Ida Tenya, and I apologize for my actions and words at the exam. You truly understood the intricacies of the exam. If I had known rescue points were a factor. Izuku cut Ida off there. That's not the point of the exam. It's a judge of character to see if you would act heroically without guidance. Bakugo sparked up from across the room. Yeah, glasses. Not everything in life will be handed to you on a platter. He snarled. Midoriya turned to retort, but before either of them could get a word out, a deep adult voice cut through the chaos. Why are you not in your seats already? Like cockroaches under a light, the clustered talkative students jumped into their seats. Some of them quite literally. Peering through the rows of students, Midoriya could just barely make out the form of a yellow blob on the floor. The blob shifted and unzipped to reveal a disheveled man in a black sweatsuit with a weird scarf thing. Change into your PE gear and meet me at the Bravo track in 15 minutes, swiveling as the teacher exited the classroom and into the hall. A few seconds of sheer quiet before the classroom erupted into more chaos of people lunging for their assigned suits and scrabbling for the door. Leaning back into his seat, Midoriya waited for the traffic to trickle down. Midoriya tugged on his tracksuit as he walked to the track. When he had first gone to the locker room, Midoriya had been admittedly very nervous until he'd spotted the open bathroom stalls adjoining the room. He'd been even more nervous as he realized he'd have to remove his binder. However, popping open his case, he felt his tension ease. On top of his blue clothing sat a little note. Apparently, Yue had built a binder into the suit for him. Now wearing the loose one-piece, Izuku met with Uraraka on the outer ring of students crowding their teacher, Hitoshi sauntering up moments later. After a few struggling students joined the ring, the pro hero turned to the class. Is this all of you? A quiet nod from the last students to exit the locker rooms, and the hero continued. I am your homeroom teacher, Aizawa. Today your physical capabilities will be tested to their maximum with the allowance of quirk use. Are there any questions? Excited chatter broke out between a few students, one especially bright and pink girl smiling and giggling as she talked about playing with her quirk's attributes. Izuku was not the only one to catch the girl's bubbly words as the pro hero glared in her direction, silence sweeping the crowd as he spoke. This school is not about having fun. Your training here is for saving lives and apprehending criminals. If you think this will all be fun and games, you might as well walk away right now. Now if there are no questions, we will. The hero stopped as a stiff hand rose from Ida. Yes, sensei. I believe we are missing the freshman orientation for this. Will we be able to make that up? Bloodshot eyes glared at the formal boy. No, that orientation will do nothing for your careers but waste time. Now let's get started. Before we continue, I must apologize to those who are not physically enhanced by their quirk, as UA focuses on strength rather than talent. Something bitter hung in Aizawa's voice as he pulled his phone from his pocket, quickly typing something in. In seconds, a vibrant hologram hosting the class's ranked exam scores. Izuku nudged Uraraka winner by his cough. He couldn't breathe. How could he breathe at a time like this when he was ranked first in the class? Bakugo second and Todoroki third. The first in class. Apparently he wasn't the only one surprised as he heard weak firecrackers pop up from the back of the crowd. Eyes and ears zeroing in on the noise. Midoriya locked eyes with a furious blonde. Underneath heavy breathing and side conversations, he could hear the low growl Bakugo emitted. "You're effing dead." Crushing the humor he found in the statement, Midoriya backpedaled as Bakugo lunged at him through the crowd. Bumping into someone, Midoriya apologized and quickly tried to shuffle around them, a growing pull on the back of his collar tethering him to the spot. Baring his teeth in anxious frustration, Izuku eyed the perpetrator, eyebrows scrunching in confusion as he recognized it to be Aizawa-sensei. Hair eerily floating and eyes red. Balefully returning his attention to Bakugo skidding to stop in front of their teacher, firecrackers cut short by his glare. Eraserhead his brain supplied. Gently releasing Midoriya, the teacher addressed Bakugo. "Were you planning on attacking your classmate?" The blonde held onto his anger even as his glare faltered. "There's no way a quirkless loser like him," he thrusted a finger in Midoriya's direction, "could ever beat me." Practically snarling the last bit, Bakugo balled his fists and waited, crossing his arms. Aizawa's look of apathetic disinterest took on a colder edge. That you would insinuate UA plays favorites while also mocking a classmate does not put you in a good standing for this class. Izuku's stomach dropped. Mocking. Of course, being called quirkless would be considered mocking by anyone other than himself. For him it was just fact. All Might's quirk and his blessing weren't really his. In any case, the drilled in insults from hormonal middle schoolers, but to hear it from an adult. Eyes turned to the ground, he returned his attention to the conversation. "Propulsion is up to your homeroom teacher. I could end your future at UA the second I choose to. So it would behoove you to learn civility and humility while attending this school." Spinning on his heel, Aizawa held a ball out to Midoriya, who was thoroughly shell-shocked. "Midoriya, you had the top score, so you'll be starting off our testing with the ball throw." Clicking his jaw shut, Izuku took the ball from his teacher and followed him to the testing field. Staring out across the dirt, Midoriya searched for the end of its radius. Measure marks fading in the distance left him vaguely wondering how many miles it went for. "You may do anything you want as long as you don't exit the circle." Turning the ball over in his hands, Midoriya furrowed his brows. Closing his eyes, he listened into his heartbeat and felt for the warmth that dripped in his veins like honey. Carefully tapping its source like a maple tree, he felt his veins rise and skin crawl with new fur, horns stretching into vision much like his curly bangs. Opening his eyes, Izuku pulled back his arm, twisting his hips and shifting his weight and filling his lungs. Muscles straining, he snapped his arm forward. Wind screaming past him, throwing his hair every way and ripping his sleeve to tatters. Looking up, Midoriya's hawk eyes quickly picked out the white smudge of a ball against the bright sky, keenly watching it grow smaller and smaller until it gouged into the earth beyond any other student's line of sight. Aizawa turned his phone screen to the hushed crowd of students. 3,000 meters. Izuku's legs bent at the knee in a crouch. Eyes widening, Uraraka watched as his shoes slowly slid back. Real lightning skipping across his skin while his bones stretched and pants tightened around his new wolf-like legs. Ears twitching, the boy glanced back at them before swiftly raising a hand. "Sensei." "Yes, Midoriya." Awkwardly looking down to his feet, the beastly boy spoke. "May I take off my shoes and socks?" A swift nod, and the boy was already untying his shoes and grumbling as he tried to pull his torn-up socks off claws. A few in the crowd chuckled, overhearing the number one student mumble, "Ah, said another pair of socks." Nervously smiling, Midoriya glanced at his competitors, an all-around pink girl and a tailed boy with short blonde hair, who both returned the smile with a few unheard words. Setting his shoes aside, Midoriya returned to his sprinter's crouch. Aizawa-sensei pulled out his phone, fumbling around with it before looking at the runners. From the corner of her eye, Uraraka could see the red lights of cameras at the finish turn on. 3. Uraraka snapped her head back to the tensing sprinters. 2. Lightning whipped around Midoriya's legs, the chaotic dancing of the electricity eerily silent. 1. The sound of cracking thunder was all the crowd got before they were left coughing up dust and tearily wiping their eyes. Midoriya felt the sun bake into his skin as he found Uraraka and Hitoshi in the crowd. He had excelled at every test Aizawa had given them, yet the blackened, nervous corner of his mind still begged the question, what if he didn't have what Sensei was looking for? His ever-persistent paranoia quickly leapt from thought to thought. His legs were stiff and still shocked back like a dog's fur, uncomfortable under sweatpants. He could even feel fur crawling down his biceps and the uncomfortable feeling of too many teeth and a mouth just a little too long to be human. Oily, thick anxiety curled around him, weighing on his mind like chains. How long would it be till he was human? If these changes kept coming, well, how long would he have left? Ears dropping, Midoriya's sullen eyes returned to Aizawa yet again, fiddling with his phone. What would his teacher's red gaze bring on him? What would he think when his fur didn't recede but his strength did? Midoriya jolted upright, a sharp jab from an elbow leaving his side stinging. Ears pricked straight up, Izuku whipped his head, glaring at the perpetrator, only to find Uraraka returning an equally furious glare. Glare melting like butter on hot concrete. Midoriya held her gaze, confused, Uraraka's own glare softening into a soft, "Stop being nervous. You did amazing." She thought this was about his score. At least he wouldn't have to explain himself. Giving her a small nod, Izuku returned his gaze to Aizawa-sensei, focusing his ears on him to drown out his own thoughts. Izuku just barely heard the grizzled man curse the UA teacher's app as Aizawa threatened to break his phone with furious key pressing. A few more seconds of angry clicking and muttering, the man finally turned to the screen, scores and names fizzling into sight. Izuku could feel his jaw drop, pupils growing to the size of quarters and ears wrapped as he read his standing again and again. First in class. I guess the entrance exam wasn't a fluke. Shaking himself out of the trance, Izuku quickly scanned for his friends' names. Uraraka coming in 10th with her ball toss being the highest, and Shinso coming in last. Despite his sprints and push-ups being better than others, everyone else simply had something they excelled at that brought them a boost of points and raising their average number. Giving Hitoshi a friendly shoulder bump, Midoriya's eyes tracked the new movement of their teacher. These are the barriers you must seek to break while attending UA. If you don't manage that by the end of the year, you will be expelled from this program. Pausing momentarily, the hero raised the crowd with something that wasn't quite anger, more so a cold appraising judgment. That will be all for today. Now go home and be safe. I think you did pretty good, Shinso. Coming from the top of the class, he sarcastically jabbed, knowing just how flustered the green boy would get. Not even because he knew him too well, just because he seemed to get flustered by everything. Looking down at the freckled boy, Shinso burst out laughing at the boy's beet red face. "SH, shut up," he yelled, training his eyes on the brick patchwork of UAS sidewalks. Another, smaller, pair of shoes entering his field of vision. "Oh, two lovebirds taking the train home together, huh?" Uraraka cackled, sidling up to the boys. Through snorting laughter, she somehow wheezed out, "How can a person be so red?" Blood heating his face like a furnace, Izuku watched as a fourth pair of shoes joined their group, a stoic and deep voice announcing Ida Tenya's arrival. "Ah, is this friendly group bullying? I understand that this is all in good fun, but I am afraid our small green friend is turning into a small red friend instead. Also, may I request your group to travel to the train station?" Snorting at the oh-so-formal equivalent of "Can I walk with you?" Izuku couldn't help but let out a small cackle and watch Ida's own face redden. Catching his breath, Midoriya replied, "Of ducking course you can, Ida. Our ragtag team always needs more crew members." Brow scrunching in a serious manner, Izuku stared into the distance. The bigger the crew, the better our chance of surviving the fall of society into a dystopia. Sheepishly nodding with confusion blatantly written on his face, Ida fell into step with the others. Fumbling for his house key, Midoriya's jaws stretched in a tiger-like yawn. His mouth was human again, ignoring his permanent canines, while his legs still held onto their fur. Brass key sliding into place, he paused. Odd. He could have sworn he locked it. No, he was sure he had. Again his anxiety boiled. Placing an ear to the door, he slowed his breathing. The muffled mumbling of a news station. He leaned in. A quiet shuffling. Soft footsteps. Suddenly a loud click had him jumping, only for him to fall forward through the door. Scrabbling to his feet and holding his fists up, he slowly growled, readying himself. "Izuku, honey, what are you doing?" "Oh no." Squinting, Izuku focused his eyes, the familiar warm shape of Inko greeting him, a cocked smile and amused eyes glinting. "Ooh." Realizing his claws were still fisted, Izuku threw his arms down only to bring one back and scratch his neck. "Ayu, didn't know you'd be home." She lit up. "I wanted to make you a special dinner before you got home." She sighed. "But I guess your teacher let you out early, huh?" Izuku slipped his shoes off. "Yeah, it was basically a physical assessment." Entering the kitchen, Inko asked, "Oh, so did you like it?" Following her, his fingers cupping his chin, he thought about it for a moment. "Do you remember when school would have you run the fitness gram pacer test?" Idly stirring the frying squash, Inko calmly asked, unbeknownst to what fresh hell Izuku's PE class concocted for a bunch of 12-year-olds whose knees were almost as rough and dirty of the concrete they tripped on. "No, I was homeschooled until middle school." "What is that?" "Well," Izuku began, a sharp smile crawling onto his face as he unbuttoned his school jacket. "Okay, so where should I start with this?" Izuku set the last pan on the drying rack. Running his wet hands through his hair, Izuku slid his uniform blouse on and buttoned it up, biting his tongue as he focused on keeping his claws from scratching the gray fabric. Nails clicking on the hardwood, Izuku made his rounds through the house before leaving for the day, turning off the TV and lights, checking the window locks, and finally locking the door behind him. Hiding the key in his backpack, Izuku ignored the feeling of claws in his shoes and eyes on the back of his neck. The beastly boy meandered to the staircase. The stairwell was dark. Well, not dark per se, but it felt dark. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. Biting his tongue and balling his fists, Izuku told himself there was nothing there. He moved, a solitary footstep echoing through the cement structure. Ears flattening against his head, he took another step, and another. Echoes chased and berated him, dim lighting seeming to increase their volume. He slowed. The steps did not. Wait, the steps continued. Throwing his head over his shoulder, his large eyes leering into the darkness. Someone glared back. A figure in dull faded colors glared back at him, pale hair and chapped lips shadowed by their hood. Izuku squared his shoulders and ignored the hot sweat beading on his back. He took the steps 2 at a time. A raspy voice echoing from behind him. "What's wrong, kid?" The last word spat out like a curse. "Nothing." His voice cracked, almost tripping over the last step on the flight, only to stumble down another flight. Another set of footsteps raced after him. "Well, you seem to have a problem with me." Izuku jumped down the next flight of stairs. "I don't have a problem with you." The last flight of stairs, and Izuku was sprinting out the exit. A scratchy echoed yell of "See that you don't, you a brat." Panting, Izuku felt his foot claws scratching against the iron inserts used to prevent shoe destruction as he slowed and waited for traffic to slow. God, what the F was that? What the F? Christ, now he was all sweaty before he could even see the school grounds. Idly lifting an arm and sniffed himself. Gagging, he hoped it was just his enhanced sense of smell that made his sweat so potent. Grumbling, he nervously glanced around as he walked to the train station, feeling his heartbeat against his chest like a rabbit digging a tunnel against his ribcage. Biting his lower lip, he clamped his arms down to protect the common populace from his reeking pits. Wedging himself into a corner, he clamped his clawed hand around the lower end of the bus pole, eyes quickly jumping around the train car. "Hey, Deku!" He jumped, biting his tongue, quickly running his claws through his hair in a meager attempt at looking presentable. His hair swiftly knotting itself back up and around his horns. "Hey, Uraraka!" Sidling to the side and gripping the pole lower, he flashed a toothy smile. Uraraka's brown bob of hair pushing through the crowd with ease, her round blushing face bursting through the sea of bodies to return Midoriya's flashing grin. Her small hands quickly latching onto the pole and planting her feet. While she stood defensively, her face was as inviting as ever, permanently pink cheeks and caramel eyes colorfully popping against the dull gray of her UA uniform. "Ready for our first real day of school?" Izuku distantly felt his ears twitching and radar dishing around him. Apparently a part of him was still nervous. From the morning. His eyes jumped to the man standing behind Uraraka, a businessman checking his watch, before he reined them back in, focusing on Uraraka. "Why, yeah, hopefully it's not as intense as yesterday was. What classes do you have today?" Uraraka reached into her shirt's pocket and brought out a small touch-screen phone in a pink case with alien planets and stars bottling it, a dangling astronaut charm glinting in the train's LED lights. I have the regard classes and then English, Spanish, and creative art." Izuku pulled out his own All Might-themed phone. "Cool, I have the same 1A classes and then new English, sign language, and biology." "Aw man, I should have thought about sign language. Darn it. Anyway, who do you think our hand-to-hand instructor is going to be?" His eyes flicked across the compartment before reaching hers. "Well, I think it's going to be Aizawa-sensei actually." "Really? I thought he was just our homeroom." Every teacher at UA is a pro hero and usually takes a class or two to instruct. And since Aizawa-sensei is a racerhead, I imagine he knows best about close-up combat since he usually fights quirkless or makes his opponent quirkless." His ears flicked, picking out odds and ends of nearby conversation. "And now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder if we're going to be using quirks in class. I mean, I know UA is about teaching us to control our quirks, but would that be a deficit when learning hand-to-hand?" He glanced at a businesswoman who had raised her phone in their direction. "I know someone like Bakugo would need some hand-to-hand because he usually focuses on quirk use, but Midoriya, let's continue this conversation off the train maybe." He looked up confused. It was already their stop. He nervously chuckled. "Yay, sorry, I sometimes get carried away." Rubbing the back of his neck, he bit his tongue. That really was a bad habit. Weaving through the morning crowds, the 2 UA students made their way to the other side of the street and headed for UA. Walking in silence for a moment, Midoriya felt the gentle strain of his pupils constricting in the sunlight. "He's a racerhead." Midoriya's ears pricked forward. "Never heard of him before." "Ooh, yeah. He's an underground hero, so I'm not surprised. Really, I've only ever found a few articles about him." Uraraka's hair glinted gold in the sunlight. "No," a sit-eating grin crossed her face. "I guess I'm just not enough of a hero otaku." Heat rushed to his ears and cheeks. Wait, no, we're going to a hero school. It was all research. Uraraka swung around, walking backwards. Clasping her hands, she thrust them forward in a mock plead. Oh, teach me your ways, hero nerd sensei. You wish. How laughable. He threw on a haughty accent. I just don't think you have. Oh, what's the word? Skill. Hands clutching her heart, she spun back around and stumbled like she'd been dealt a death blow. How dare you? The audacity. Izuku snorted, barely able to control her own laughter. Uraraka fell to pieces, tears pricking her eyes. Midoriya, unable to keep himself from joining in. Ears pitching forward, he froze, one leg in the air, chuckle dying in his throat. Uraraka continuing to walk. Uraraka's laughter nervously petered off as Izuku stood frozen. A noise. Why can't I move? Swiveling his ears to focus the sound. Where was it coming from? Why can't I effing move? Gotta move. It's just some effing noise. I'm fine, we're fine. An echoing thunder of chatter rumbled in the distance. You okay, Midoriya? Izuku clenched his fist, breaking the tension in his muscles, skating his head to rattle his brain free from ears flapping like a dog's. Why yeah, I just hear something up ahead. His fingers twitched, taking slow steps forward, his ears straining to organize the disorganized chatter that seemed to grow louder with each step. Uraraka periodically glanced back at him, eyebrows furrowed. They had walked a block by the time his legs stopped twitching and his heart slowed. Ears ringing, the ceaseless chatter slowly sharpened, words and phrases pelting him like stones. All Might UAS stance on recent staff not having teaching experience. Camera over here. This pretentious institution, he is here. Something's happening at the gate. Are those reporters? Hey Uraraka. Ihua. Can we take a different entrance today? What is it, lassie? What do your elf ears hear? Izuku gently touched a fluffy ear. Elf ear. Whatever. Well, it sounds like there's a bunch of reporters at the front gate. Uraraka nodded along, lifting a hand to cup her chin in thought. Is there even a side entrance close to the main buildings? Izuku scratches the back of his neck. Well, the walls and surrounding sidewalks count as school grounds, right? Uraraka let out a questioning. Yes. Stepping closer to one of the cement walls of UAS barrier, he looked up. And we're allowed to use our quirks on school grounds, right? Uraraka nodded, no less confused. Why don't we just go over the wall? Our student IDs should keep the security system from immobilizing us. Uraraka joined him at the wall. This feels like crime. Is this crime? Izuku shrugged. Maybe. Can you make yourself weightless? You can hold on to me while I climb to the top, then you can float us down safely from there. If that doesn't make you too nauseous. Kicking of his shoes and tying them around his neck, waiting for her answer. Uraraka nodded along. Yeah, I should be fine. UAS about that plus ultra attitude anyway, right? With that, she touched her fingers to her arm and reached out for Midoriya, who swiftly brought her close and let her wrap her arms around his chest. Ignoring the blood rushing to his cheeks, would she think his chest was too soft? Is that a thing? Do boys have hard chests? Whatever. He sank his thick talons into the concrete with help from his God bless his strength. Izuku hauled them up the wall little by little, back claws scratching and finding cracks just as easily as his hands. Damn dude, I thought you were super skinny, but you have muscle under there after all. She thinks I have huge specs. Well, that's better than I could have hoped for. Uraraka giggled, her arms tightening slightly. You're like a effing gecko, dude. God, his face was so effing red. Don't look back. He looked down. Damn, they were kinda far up, huh? Looking up, he could see the ledge. Lunging forward, he clawed the ledge and pulled himself up, Uraraka lightly touching a hand to his shoulder. Ready? She asked, sounding only the slightest bit queasy. He felt her arms tighten against his chest again. Ready? With that, he kicked off the wall, directly them at the main school buildings. Uraraka slowly easing them to the ground so they floated down right in front of the main doors. Ears pinned back, Izuku listened to the dull roar of the media. Kachunk. Izuku jumped. What the F was that? Snapping his head around, he couldn't see past the gates, or where the gate usually was, a seamless wall sealing off the exit and silencing the crowd of newscasters and gossip mongers. And leisure Haguyuao. Uraraka moaned. You okay? I threw up in my mouth. Haha, gross. Izuku checked his watch. We have a few minutes, but we should really get to class. Speed walking through the building and taking the steps 2 or 3 at a time. Great, I bet I effing reek. Breathing heavily, he and Uraraka quietly skipped through the cracked classroom door. Swiftly kicking his bag under his seat, he slid into the desk behind the sleeping Hitoshi. You smell like gym socks, dude. Or at least he had, though he was asleep. I've had a long morning. Midoriya groaned bitterly. Midoriya slumped in his desk, running through Aizawa's hand-to-hand combat forms in the back of his head. I think I'm going to buy a second gym uniform. Shinsu glanced over, head propped up by his arm. Yeah, probably a smart idea. The two fell into silence, people watching from the window. They had been waiting for their battle instructor for a few minutes now, and the break was about to end. Izuku looked at Shinso, his golden eyes reflecting the sun like honey on amber. Who do you think our next teacher is? Shinso tapped his chin in thought. A hero who gets in battles a lot and has patience and experience teaching strategy to others. Maybe Kamui Woods. Uraraka leaned over from her desk across the aisle. What about Gang Orca? Izuku carted a hand through his hair. Slam flinching, his claws dully scratched his scalp. Here I am. All Might was at the class door, a few minutes late and showing it with his wrinkled suit, which was so tight on his muscles it may as well be self-ironing. Walking through the door like an average person. Snorting, Izuku gave a small two-fingered wave. All Might returning with a wave disguised as slicking back his hair. Today we will be running through a mock team battle. Everyone get into your wonderfully made and artistically inclined hero suits and meet me at False City C. Midoriya tugged on his chest/proof padding. Is this stupid? I feel like this is stupid. Everyone else is so flashy and cool. Casting a wayward glance at Todoroki's confusing collage, a nice quirk, Izuku hung his school uniform up. Taking one last look in the mirror, Izuku double-checked all his gear was zipped up or velcroed down. A black mesh mask with dark reflective visor hid his eyes and distinct freckles, his green curls sweeping around his swooping horns. Underneath the mop of hair he could vaguely make out the shape of a small microphone safely hooked around his elongated ear. Letting out a small huff, Midoriya followed one of the other students to the arena. If he remembered right, he was the one with the tape quirk that reminded him of Spider-Man. One of the first pro-heroes to gain support from the populace despite the government's prejudicial treatment of quirked humans, which at the time had been relatively low, maybe 2,000 individuals in the entire world, not counting the man who shot himself outward into space after drug use and was never recovered, the boy with the electric quirk. Izuku only knew because he could practically smell the static rippling off of him, gasped from behind him. Oh my god, dude. What the F? I never learned that in school, what the F? Midoriya threw up his ungloved hands, armored shirt ending at his elbows where his scaling began. So sorry if I annoyed you. I have a bad mumbling habit. No, that's not the problem here. My problem is how the F can we learn about cursive but not about the dude who shot himself into space while high as hell. Congratulations on your victory, Villain Team Charlie. Now Hero Team Alpha and Villain Team Echo, please take your positions. All Might finished with an applause that roused all the students into clapping too, Todoroki's face remaining blank and cool while Kaminari reddened at the attention. Let us go, Midoriya. Midoriya's ears turned toward his bird-like partner before he had the chance to turn his head. Oh, sorry, I just got distracted. Takoyami swung his cape further around himself and nodded toward the door. Don't worry about it. We must start forming a plan. Following him, Midoriya couldn't help but feel slightly nauseous, face to face with Bakugo, and this time he had permission to beat Izuku up. Izuku piped up the second his foot touched the hero team's encircled starting location. Bakugo will come for me first. Takoyami's beak clacked as he absorbed the outburst. What makes you say that? A hand rubbing his chin as he asked. Ears flicking back, Midoriya responded. Let's call it prior history. Do you have any idea what Kota might do? Not in the slightest. From what I understand, his quirk is unrelated to his appearance, though I have no idea what it will actually be. I do understand that Bakugo has an explosion quirk. Correct. He is very combat-driven when using them, specifically at me. If you don't mind me asking, what's your quirk? I don't mind at all. Ask long as you return the favor. My quirk is called Dark Shadow. A wispy black shadow curled over Takoyami's shoulder as he spoke, slowly forming into a resemblance of Takoyami himself. He is an ancient spirit that resides within me. I believe I may have been cursed as a child. Golden eyes peered up at Takoyami, a crack in the shadow growing into a beaked mouth, a fizzling black static distorting the air around it. Oh, stop saying that. I know you love me. It warbled, piercing golden eyes turning to Izuku. You are something new. And with nothing else the spirit dissipated. What the fuck? How charming. Anyway, my quirk is a type of animalistic transformation with advanced healing and strength. A crackling explosion set off by his ear as Bakugo led in with his right fist, aiming for Izuku's already bruising ribs. Shifting his weight, Izuku wrapped and grabbed Bakugo's arm with his own, carrying the explosive boy's momentum forward and slamming him into the concrete. A fizzling in his ear. Midoriya, I have secured the bomb. What is your location? Growling, the blonde swept a leg out from under the smaller teen, sending him down to the pavement. Grunting, he heard his helmet crack from taking the brunt of the hit while his bruised ribs winded him. Izuku felt Bakugo swiftly straddle him. A resentful snarl snuck its way into his ear. You made me look a goddamn idiot. Deep pops shadowed the sound of a pin being pulled. You're going to regret it. A growing hiss building. A crackle over the building's speakers echoed in their earpieces. The hero team has won and the exercise is over. Young Bakugo, this is your only wa. The hiss swelled and Izuku couldn't hear anything beyond his own screaming and blood in his ears. Takoyami stumbled as the building shook, pillars groaning and floors collapsing somewhere below them and off in another end of the complex. Midoriya, are you okay? Can you hear me? Takoyami called into his mic. Takoyami took off at a dead sprint, Kudo limping after him. both their boots skidding as they rounded hallway corners and thudding as they skimmed flights of stairs. Panting, Takoyami paused. Several hallways leading off into darkness before him. Coughing, he pulled on Dark Shadow. Which way is he? The spirit's golden eyes scanned each hallway with barely a pause before lunging down one off to the left, chasing after the spirit's pull on his chest. Takoyami began to solely depend on the tug of its presence, smoke thickening and burning his eyes and throat the further they went. He could hear a faint rough breathing ahead of him and the steps of Kuda behind. Midoriya, he called, breaking into rough hacking. Peering through tears, he could just barely make out two shapes in the smoke. Stepping forward, his eyes widened. Bakugo was pinned to the wall by a clawed hand twisting into his shirt. Following the arm back, Takoyami couldn't help but take a step back, while Dark Shadow lurched closer. Midoriya's jacket had been ripped and shredded to nothing, exposing the white of rib bones and cartilage that still gushed blood. The damage only continued upward, exposing his trachea and the ends of writhing veins that seemed to twist upward and branch out. Jawbone and fangs were shifting as well, stretching along his his muzzle. A pair of glowing green eyes illuminating Bakugo's stricken face. Bakugo, Midoriya said with a strange reverb, tongue visible through his slowly regenerating snout. I need you to get over your effing mommy issues. Because I am not going anywhere. Spitting out the last few words, Midoriya dropped Bakugo from the wall. Shoving down his nausea, Takoyami took a step forward. Dark Shadow also slid closer to the injured boy, reveling in the green eye shine. Oh, you are quite new. No ashes for you, just spring leaves. Interesting. With that, the spirit withdrew into the bird-like student. Ignoring the spirit's comment, Takoyami dared to go even closer, Kuda at his side. Midoriya. Sorry, Takoyami. I was right though, wasn't I? The only ear the boy had flicked back. You should have told me what kind of history. Now stop talking, you need to go to the nurse now. It's not that bad, he said as tendons and veins squirmed across swelling muscle. Ribs still visible. Are you not in pain? Adrenaline. I am here to rescue. All Might stopped short, frozen in place as he took in the bloody tendons and skin snaking across Midoriya's flesh. Then in a smaller voice, young Midoriya. A sigh came from his injured classmate, oddly whistling through his teeth, gums, and throat all at once. Glowing eyes looking away from his mentor. Are you in pain? Midoriya wiggled his jaw around, feeling the smooth skin fade into a fuzzy muzzle. A little sore, I guess, he answered softly. Recovery girl scribbled something down, sighing as she prodded Izuku's white furred chest again, listening to his anxious heartbeat yet again. She slapped her notepad down on the table, causing Izuku to slightly jump. I have nothing else for you. You're completely healthy. The muzzle and fur should go as soon as you're rested. However, her voice rising in anger. If I ever find you in here again, covered in your blood and flesh, I will make sure you enter heroics in bubble wrap every day. Why, yes, ma'am, Izuku whimpered, ears folding back. Now, go to lunch in class, after you take a shower and aren't covered in your own blood. She waved him off, muttering something about not even needing her quirk. Take this hoodie. Can't have you wandering around without clothes, can we? Midoriya practically ripped the cloth from her hands, quickly wriggling into the plush blue fabric. Hopping off the bed, Midoriya stiffly opened the door and made his way to the school showers. Did I miss anything? Zero idly spoke, eyes fixated on the camera coverage of the current battle between heroes Todoroki and Tsuyu versus Lita and Takoyami. Nothing too crazy, well, except for Yaoyorozu creating a computer to hack into the cameras. Midoriya's ear flicked involuntarily. Sounds like it was a stir-up. Zero turned his head to respond before yelping and jumping back. Dude, why is your face like that? Zero whispered, voice tense as he caught himself halfway through yelling. Midoriya felt the eyes turn towards him amongst the crowd. It's a side effect of my quirk. It'll go away soon. Hopefully very soon. Eyes scanning the crowd in perfect clarity. Spotting Uraraka's reflective astronaut visor, Midoriya slid through the crowd, new whiskers twitching as he brushed against his classmate. Hey Uraraka. Hey Midoriya. Wow, so fluffy. Shoes in hand, Izuku quietly slipped through his front door, expecting Inko to be in bed as she was running the midnight to noon shift at work, only to freeze as he locked eyes with her in the kitchen, a still steaming mug of tea in her hand, and another across the table from her. OHNO. Ears back and eyes wide, he waited. She set the cup down, voice shaking slightly as she spoke. I got a call from Mitsuki and Masaru today, and then a visit from one of your teachers. Izuku slid into his seat and took his mug in hand, the tea's warmth soaking through his scales. Bakugo has been suspended for the rest of the week and will be taking remedial classes on top of his normal schooling. They have invited us to dinner tomorrow night. Whether we go or not is your decision. Izuku looked away from her glistening eyes to stare into his cooling tea as if it held the answers, when all he found was the soft glow of his eyes shining back at him. His voice cracked. I think we should go, he said softly, shivering as he remembered the feeling of a breeze striking his exposed ribs. We don't have to. Yue has also offered for Bakugo to be expelled if you choose. Tapping his claws against his mug, Izuku hesitated before asking, Do you think he can change? Inko took a drink from her mug, Izuku following her lead. You're both young, and I know it's hard to see, but Katsuku has a real possibility of getting better at UA, and if he gets thrown out, he will remain this way forever. UA is already setting him up with a therapist and behavioral classes. That doesn't guarantee anything though, and your safety and opinion is the most important thing to me. I will stand by you. Izuku returned his gaze to her eyes. Still brimming with tears, she defiantly held back. Izuku's eyes mirrored hers. He took a deep breath. Homeroom felt empty. Ida simply organizing his backpack for a third time, a small satisfied smile overshadowed by his scrunched eyebrows. A few of their classmates seemed almost unfazed by the lack of argument in the classroom, a few nervous looks to Bakugo's empty seat the only sign of their curiosity. Izuku rifled his hands through his hair, slowly fraying his curls into a small afro, his horns sticking from the hair like stray branches of a bush, his claws softly scratching his horns. His ears pricked to the sound of someone grasping the room's door handle. A hush fell on the class, accompanied with chairs being pulled forward, Aizawa's bereft gaze sweeping the room cleanly while the hero took his place at the board. Sweat beaded down Izuku's back, ears pinned down and hands growing more restless. Bakugo will not be joining us this week. I think you all know why. I assure you his aggression is being remedied. Classes will continue as normal. Anxiety pitched in his stomach, forcing his hands to clench his lunch tray with white knuckles. So far he had been able to slip between classes without so much as a word to his classmate. Nearly jumping out of his chair at the bell, Midoriya yanked his backpack from under his chair and pelted out of the class into the hallway, ignoring a faint call of his name from Uraraka. Slipping into the crowd, he hoped the taller students would hide him well. Breaking from the mingling students, Midoriya ran through the courtyard and practically leaped into the branches of a densely branched tree. Panting, he swung himself on top of a large limb and pressed himself against the trunk, book bag dangling from a near branch. Izuku clutched his knees close to his chest. He knew this wouldn't last, but he just needed today. Just right now. He could talk about it any other time. Just not now. He just needed some time. Just needed to hay. Gasping, Midoriya ripped himself from his thoughts and snapped his ears and eyes toward the monotone voice. Tired gold eyes gazing at Midoriya through deep green leaves. Shinso's gold eyes flicked away from Midoriya's. I'm not asking you to climb down. I am going to ask you to eat your lunch before you go back to class. I'll walk back with you once you're ready. With that, Shinso plopped down at the foot of the tree, head of purple hair resting against its bark. Taking deep breaths, Izuku wiped the wetness from his eyes and reached into his backpack to retrieve his bento. He still had 4 more hours of peering eyes and accusatory glances to get through. Ignoring the rising hair on his neck, Izuku's fangs sank into a piece of chicken breast. Izuku glared at the mirror. Unruly hair flattened on one side and the other side sticking straight up. Ordinarily, he would fix it by just dunking his bed head into the full sink. However, due to the addition of horns jutting out from under the shining locks that one time he had forgotten about, only to end up with a headache and a chip in the sink. Sighing, Izuku slid his head under the running shower faucet and quickly pulled it back out. Hurriedly combing and mousing his hair, Midoriya tugged on his uniform and happily clipped on his tie. Grinning at the mirror, Izuku's glinting fangs stuck out over his lips, his ears and horns poking out from his hair, overall giving him the feeling that he looked like a... what was his name? Despero or something. In any case, he could get through the day. He was over the whole killing Bakugo's career fear. Today would be a good day. Izuku's ears flicked forward toward the school gates. Once was annoying enough. Do they have to hound us every week? Uraraka wiggled her fingers around over the wall again. My dear partner in crime. Izuku did a deep medieval bow. Why, of course, my deviant pal. Aizawa glared out from his scarf and bangs at the quieted classroom, eyes slowly roving before settling on Midoriya. A hand suddenly jutting out and pointing at him, Aizawa's other hand pointing at Uraraka. Nedzu has politely informed you 2 sits need to stop hopping the fence. But what a boo, Uraraka started, quickly cut off by a frustrated groan from Aizawa. Nedzu has assured me and the other teachers that the reporters will no longer be an issue and we will have a hero clear them out if they return. The class quietly nodded, making no motion to further question the pro. Good. Now for some normal homeroom business. You must vote on a homeroom president. Are you eating lunch with us today, Midoriya? Picking at the hem of his shirt, Izuku shuffled his feet, ears twitching. Pulling his bento from his bag, Midoriya piped up. If that would be all right with you guys. Uraraka rolled her eyes. Come on, silly. We need to get a good table before the rest of the students. Grouping up like a school of fish, the teenagers slipped through the crowded hallway until the walls finally opened up into a wide and tall room lined with windows and students, numerous round tables dotting the space. Ada, being the tallest of them, led the group toward an empty table near one of the windowed walls. The crew swarmed the table and quickly fell into their meals, an empty seat awaiting Shinsu as he was getting a tray from Lunch Rush. As food was pecked at, a conversation picked up, Uraraka the main driving force of it. And then surprisingly, Shinsu broke into the waves of conversation with a small but well-thought comment on how gentrification of an area is linked to crime and heroism, leading to both Uraraka and Midoriya pouncing on the topic. Midoriya's claws nearly ripped his ears as he smashed them down against his head, a sharp alarm cutting through the cafeteria crowd's chattering. Eyes pinched in pain, Izuku bolted upright, backing himself away from the surging bounds quickly surrounding the exit. Eyes wide, he stumbled back into the corner, quietly clutching his ears and scratching his horns. Someone tugged at his sleeve. Wincing, he tugged it back. Hardly hearing it over the alarms, he made out a small Deku. "Deku, come on." Another tug on his sleeve, and he peered up at them. Gold eyes caught his, a halo of purple hair and strong hands pulling him to his feet, hands still clamped to his ears. Izuku was led to a small door in the back of the cafeteria kitchen and out into a desolate hallway, heart thundering under his skin. Izuku could feel the frantic beat trying to burst free from his veins, static filling his lungs, blue arches scraping his fangs while he fought to catch his breath. "Midoriya, you need to breathe." Izuku sucked in another shaky breath, claws slowly releasing his raw ears, opting to worry his armored forearms. The dull rhythmic scraping slowly bringing his breathing to a more regular pace. Eyes coming into focus, he looked at Shinsu, quickly averting his eyes from the worried look that coated his face. He stuttered. "I'm okay." Shakily he stood, not resembling how he had gotten to the floor in the first place. Izuku could feel the uncomfortable sensation of fur catching on his shirt and pants. Shinsu clapped him on the shoulder. "You had me worried there, bud. I'm serious." "Sorry." Midoriya tugged on his uniform. "Don't apologize. I care about you." Midoriya let out a hesitant nod. "Don't go telling people that I have feelings, okay?" A small giggle worked its way from his lips, the last of his tremors fading along with his excess hair and sparks. Shinsu rocked back and forth on his heels. "Are you ready to find everyone else?" he asked. "I think so." Midoriya nodded, ears pricking up, the sounds of a not-too-distant argument. Curiosity rising, he lifted a finger to his lips. Shinsu, raising an eyebrow, complied, tiptoeing behind Izuku as they slinked around a corner and down a hall. A faint aroma of iron and dirt swept through the air, flooding Izuku's nose, its familiarity scratching deep in his brain. Ears flicking around like radars, the twitching student honed in on the heated conversation. One voice hollow and seemed to be echoing, the other raspy and spitting. Midoriya cautiously peered around the corner, freezing as he upon seeing a tall shadow looming over a platinum-haired man. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end as he remembered being chased from his own apartment's stairwell. "Supposed to be here, and it's not going to be my fault that these little rats." The shadow cut him off, ignoring the other man's hands striking out and quickly rushing back to scratch at themselves. Midoriya could feel Shinsu lean above him, also spying into the room. He quickly froze. Izuku could feel slight trembles quaking through Shinsu, not to say he wasn't also fighting his instinct to run. "I will not risk this any longer. If we cannot find the rest of the class, then we must work with what we have." A black wispy hand waved the smaller man into an abyss that had been ripped into the classroom's air. The pulsating blackness swelling as the men disappeared into it, quickly collapsing in on itself once they were gone. Both boys' eyes were wide, jaws clenched, Midoriya's ears pinned back. Shinsu rubbed his throat and squeaked out, "Now how the F do we tell someone what that was?" Uraraka was practically floating away as she bounced on her toes, struggling to see 13 from behind Kirishima, who turned almost as red as his hair when he realized he was blocking her and Midoriya from seeing to the front, quickly exchanging places with them. The Space Theme Hero 13 had quickly herded the class through the front doors of the large domed structure. They were trying their best to entertain the students while also educating them on the importance of respecting the grounds they were about to use for their environmental safety training. Dish-like ears focused on the hero. Izuku took in his surroundings, Present Mike and Aizawa flanking the young students at the rear. While he and Shinsu had informed Eraserhead of the strange men in their classroom and were assuaged that the school would be raising security measures, Midoriya couldn't help but feel unheard when they were surprised with a field trip. Flicking an ear, he refocused on 13, who had just reached their final point about awareness of your surroundings when an Inkai cold crawled up his arms. Neck hair standing on end, Izuku's eyes snapped to Aizawa, the hero quickly locking eyes with him before running to the front of the class. A hiss filled the air. Swinging around, Izuku saw a black hole ripping open in the USJ's courtyard. A small man dressed in black slipped out from it, his silhouette blocky and strange. And as the portal enlarged, more intimidating figures stepped forward. Several students in the class stumbled backward while others froze. Present Mike, Eraserhead, and number 13 braced at the front of the class. All Might was supposed to be here, wasn't he? I guess we can do some hero spawn killing. Maybe that will give him enough of a reason to show up. The man leered at the students for a moment before raising a hand and waving the criminals forward. A hissing static filled the air, and the air around Izuku swelled and shifted. Jumping to the side, he barely avoided the dark abyss that had enveloped the ground under the class. Seeing Uraraka's hand sink into the blackness, he choked back a whimper. A deep static voice filled his ears. "Don't think you can get away so easily." And with that, the air warbled around him as he was encased on all sides by darkness. Midoriya fell for a few seconds, his skin stinging in the freezing black of the portal, a faint glow on his skin letting him see his own hands and legs flail in the airless abyss. In the blink of an eye, he was left gasping in blinding light and sound and wind that ripped at his hair and clothes. Tears pricking his eyes, he caught a glimpse of his fate before slamming into a wall of water. Resisting the urge to gasp for air, he flailed his arms and legs trying to push himself to the surface. A hand breached and relief filled him before something rough wrapped around his legs and dragged him away from the air. Eyes wide, he could clearly see the spotted tentacle that had ensnared him. Claws sinking into it, he struggled to free himself. Tearing at the limb, blood quickly filled the water along with muffled screams. Lungs burning, Izuku tore through the limb. Another limb wrapped around his left arm. Dread filled him when he saw the 8-armed villain reach forward with her 6 other appendages. Midoriya's inflamed lungs finally won over his instinct. Water rushing into them and blackness creeping in on the edges of his vision. Claws feebling scraping at his neck, he hacked out the water only to breathe it in again. Izuku's mind floated toward his mother and her warm embrace. Dully, he felt something rush through the water around him. The pressure released from his limbs and then reattach at his waist, pulling him with it. Tsuyu and Todoroki leaned over the edge of the boat rail as a small green figure plummeted from the sky into the lake that several villains lurked in. Midoriya hit the water with an audible smack and disappeared below the turbulent water surface. On instinct, she made to jump into the water, but Todoroki latched a firm hand on her shoulder. Let's see if they notice him first. We don't want those degenerates reaching him before us. Bouncing her leg, she watched with bated breath. The seconds ticked by and no sign of the boy. Todoroki gave her a slight nod. I'll create a distraction. Sue nodded, backing away from the boy's cold wave of a hand that upon slamming into the boat railing instantly condensed and froze all the water on it. The ice quickly traveled down the boat's hull into the pool and froze the pod of villains. Turning away, she dived from the opposite side of the boat and quickly plunged to the bottom of the pool, avoiding both the rapidly cooling water and the struggling villains. Her large feet propelled her through the water toward Midoriya and what looked like an octopus. Red clouds billowed out as the two lashed around, locked in a struggle. But with each second, the water stirred less and less. Biting her lip, she forced herself to slow down until she was directly under the two. Kicking off the pool's floor, Tsuyu rocketed into the villain's back, quickly putting her into a headlock with her legs and slamming her fists into the woman's skull. Sue would admit it wasn't a very professional attack or by any means efficient, but she couldn't think of anything besides the color that was quickly fading from Midoriya's face. Slimy tentacles whipped around, pinching and wrenching her skin until with one final strike the woman fell unconscious. Despite her anger and blistering wounds, Sue pushed the octopus lady to the surface and shot her tongue to Midoriya while kicking to the surface, carefully holding his face in the air while backstroking with a single arm. Her flipper-like feet swiftly pushing her toward the boat, giving the distracted villains a large berth. Sue brought herself and Midoriya to the edge of the boat, yet again wrapping her tongue around him while she cautiously stuck her hands to the slick boat. Grunting, she pulled herself up the slick surface and over the ledge, Midoriya carefully hanging below her. Flexing her tongue, she reeled him in like a very sad fish. Flopping him out on the deck, she pushed the hair out of his pale face. Stricken by how pale and elongated it had become, the hairs on her neck standing up the longer she looked at his uncanny face. His chin and upper jaw protruding from his face, lips drawn back to reveal sharp teeth, sideburns crawling across his cheeks down his nose bridge. A hand clapped on her shoulder, shocking her out of the trance. How is he? When I got to him, a villain was trying to drown him. He's breathing, but I don't know how much water made its way into him, she croaked, glancing up at Todoroki. His bicolored eyes met hers before flicking to Midoriya. Why does he look like that? He was freezing. How did he not notice he was cold earlier? He had never been more cold than this. Hands and feet and everywhere in between was almost numb. Breath stuttering, Izuku curled in on himself, soaking uniform squeezing him tighter, frigid claws curling into his palms, dully scraping against the rough keratin lining his hands. Something shuffled beside him and a gentle warmth began spreading from between his shoulder blades. Cracking open his eyes, they quickly met a set of mismatched gray and blue eyes, numbed limbs slowly beginning to tingle. Thoughts slowly picking up speed, just as slowly realizing his classmate was holding a hand over Izuku's mouth, or more accurately clamped over his snout. Wedging his elbows underneath himself, Midoriya slowly sat up, a hot hand on his back pushing him upright. They were hiding amidst some decorative shrubbery and low walling. Blending in with her dull green outfit, Tsuyu was perched in a small tree, eyes constantly roving the surrounding area. Todoroki motioned for Izuku to follow him, keeping in a crouch as he went to the nearest wall, peeking over it. Izuku shivered as the space heater left his side and quickly joined him. Pupils constricting, he looked into a plaza, a small group of beefy villains surrounding two lithe figures clad in black. Midoriya tensed, shifting to vault himself over the wall, a cold vice grip on his arm bringing him back to reality. What do you think you can do? Todoroki said without a glimmer of warmth in his voice, lower fangs worrying his now normal lower lip. Midoriya flinched as Present Mike was kicked in the back of the head. Eraserhead quickly knocked back the assailant only for them to yank his scarf. Brows furrowed, Midoriya glared at the boy. "We can at least try, aren't you the son of a hero?" Todoroki said nothing, eyes suddenly fixed on the distant battle like he hadn't heard Midoriya at all, ears burning and twitching with each blow that landed on the hero tag team. The minutes dragging on for what felt like hours. A rustle behind the boys and his radar dish ears honed in to hear light footsteps, almost assuming it was Sue before his nose pulled in the smell of sweat and dandruff instead of her cool earthiness. Glancing back, Izuku's heart leapt into his throat, arm rigidly shoving an indignant Todoroki out of the silver-haired villain's reach, his dry hands quickly latching onto Midoriya's wrists. The temperature dropped immediately. Todoroki, mid-wrist flick, freezing at the villain's malice-soaked words. "Your little furry friend isn't going to have arms if you finish that movement. All it takes is me putting my pinkies down and we're left with nothing but a bloody hairball." Seeing the hero student hesitate and step back, the handsy villain twisted Izuku's arms behind his back, pushing him forward through the thick bushes and into the plaza. Heart twisting in his chest and skipping every other beat in his throat, Izuku stumbled forward, the man's boots bruising his ankles with each stumble. Eyes wide and unfocused, Midoriya bit his tongue, fangs dangerously close to piercing it. He wouldn't have arms, that's what the musty man had said. What kinds of quirks were able to do that? Hands covered him, so was that some kind of weird symbolism or something more literal? The lack of pinkies on his forearms made it out to be a full-contact quirk. He couldn't feel any raised pads unlike Uraraka's quirk, but he was sure of it. With a shuddering breath, he remembered his stairwell. He remembered UAS hallway, the same musty smell following each memory. A dry voice rasped next to his ear, grating against his thoughts. "I get tired of looking at you brats bursting at the seams with lies and unfounded faith in your gaudy mascots. This feels good. I want you to know that before you crumble into dust. I wonder how big those eyes will be when you realize you're dying. And you can't do a thing about it." They were almost at the plaza's fountain now, the biting smell of ozone oozing from the nicely dressed black hole. A large dark figure standing stock-still next to it, him. A sickly familiar yet unrecognizably horrid scent wafted from the hulking mass, something primal in Izuku's body scratching at the walls of his mind, an electric cold washing over his body, the sparks picking at his spine. It was tall and built better than an Olympic weightlifter, every muscle cleanly defined beneath its pulled dark skin, huge traps holding up a beaked face with blank eyes and an exposed glistening brain. "You're no better than a rat, afraid of something you haven't even seen move yet." Pathetic. He didn't know he had super strength. He hadn't gotten his file in the break-in. A small bit of luck. "I see you found a hostage, Shigaraki." A voice echoed from the rip in space. "Yes, we need something for when All Might shows up. I hope that Blue Brad is decently fast. I don't want to wait all day. I see you haven't stopped those heroes yet. There aren't many minions left. We might as well send the Namu so this level is clear for All Might." Thrusting Izuku forward, Shigaraki called out the heroes. "Oh heroes, I've found something you've lost. If you want him back, I'm afraid you'll have to beat Namu." Without looking back, Shigaraki demanded the beast. "Namu, clear this stage." Air rushed past them as the monster lunged at the remaining criminals and the two heroes. The minions stepped back for it to go to the heroes, but it didn't seem to notice the difference, methodically going from villain to villain, red splattering the concrete. Contempt chuckles quickly turning into gasps and screams and then silence, the sharp snap of bones drilling through Izuku's ears. Tears pricked his eyes. As much as he tried to, they stayed open. The Namu, glistening with blood, turned toward the two heroes. Present Mike had put himself in front of Eraserhead. Izuku could hear them panting. He could see their limbs twitch with fatigue. Shigaraki giggled as the Namu lunged forward, cracking the concrete under it, Izuku's eyes barely tracking it. Midoriya's eyes flicked to the heroes. A piercing shriek from Present Mike was cut short as a large tar-black hand latched around his throat, lifting the struggling hero into the air. Izuku gagged, his own recently injured neck throbbing at the memory. Shigaraki giggled in excitement. "No, no, no, no." Muscles rippling. The Namu snapped its long arm like a baseball player, launching the blonde man across the plaza. A distant crack echoed on his collision with the stairs, blood quickly billowing out from his limp form. Izuku's fangs punctured his tongue, blood quickly filling his mouth. "No, no, 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 no." "Hizashi." A small heartbroken mutter came from Aizawa, the Namu's beady bulging eyes focusing on the man. Aizawa shifted his tattered scarf in his hands as the Namu lurched forward, feet digging into the cement when it leaned into a sprint. In less than a second it appeared behind Eraserhead, sinuous hand palming the hero's head. It didn't seem to notice when what was left of the scarf enveloped its head and tightened. Izuku couldn't breathe. The ground vibrated, smashed goggles quickly falling off. "No, no, no. Shut up, brat." His hair soaking, bone exposed, limbs dragging as the Namu lifted him again. Izuku just couldn't breathe anymore. "No, no, 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 N. Stop effing moving or you're D." Izuku couldn't see clearly. When did he start crying? He could hear someone hyperventilating. He couldn't breathe. He jerked forward. The ground vibrated again. His wrists hurt. He could smell blood. Someone was yelling. His hands were numb and we couldn't watch this anymore. His uniform grew uncomfortable. He could feel it tearing. When did Shigaraki get so small? The man standing in a pool of blood at his feet, when could he see more than everything? The Namu lifted its arm again. It was leaking ink into the air. Aizawa was covered in blood and gold. Izuku was there. A rippling green streak darted across the plaza, striking Namu's chest, a sickening number of limbs peeling off its back before plunging into the black flesh of the villain, chunks of meat falling into the pooling blood on the floor, the muzzles ridging its back, switching between mumbling and yelling and crying. The hair on Todoroki's neck standing on end at the uncanny human quality of the incomprehensible voices. Failing to wrap its wiry body around the hulking mass of black flesh, the green streak pushed itself off the humanoid's shoulders, landing an impressive distance away. Like a cornered fox, its thick coat stood on edge and its halo of ears pinned up and forward, tossing its head like a wary bull, its many sets of arms poised like a boxer's. Letting out an aggravated scream, the beaked monstrosity flung itself at the animal, meaty hands grabbing hold of its horns in a flash. Sickening wet thuds sounded out as claws slashed through every inch of the villain they could reach. Another ear-shattering screech piercing Hitoshi's eardrums, the Namu relinquishing its hold on one of the dark horns in favor of a slashing arm. Without even a grunt of effort, the Namu managed to lift the small bus-sized creature over its head before body slamming back into the earth. Like it had felt nothing, the mammalian conglomerate latched itself onto the villain's back, teeth and nails digging at the already healed skin of it. Namu's dry eyes flicked back to the animal, its arms snatching a pair of the assailant's wrists as they came to rip into it, the creature bellowing in pain as it was given a new set of elbows with synchronized crunches. Namu quickly ripping the distracted animal from its skin and slamming it into the ground beside Aizawa, its blocky head thwacking audibly against the slick concrete, a broken horn skidding across the plaza. The Namu switched its grip to the creature's tail, quickly snapping off the spider-like legs that sprouted from its end, a cacophony of screams and whimpers from the thing's spinal muzzles, the main head hardly twitching. Dragging the body, the Namu slowly circled like it was preparing to pitch a discus, only to slam the screaming corpse into the concrete again. And again, and again. Wet bone gleaming as pieces of the animal's pelt were left behind on the ground. With a final ground-shaking slam, Namu left the quiet mess of a corpse behind. Goaded on by Shigaraki's cheers, it turned to Aizawa. Huffing, rattling breaths drew Hitoshi's attention. The beast that had once saved him was slowly pushing itself to a stand, its bleeding stoppered, skin slowly crawling back over its face, the holes that spattered its body filling with something vaguely white. Legs gathered underneath itself and head low, it prowled toward the oblivious Namu, its rear maws all biting their tongues. Hitoshi waited with bated breath, the animal pausing at a decent distance from its assailant, green light arching across its fur and licking up and down its remaining horn. Sitting back on its haunches much like a cat, it hesitated, then pounced. Slamming into the villain, the animal screamed victoriously even as Namu thrusted its hands into its open wound. Spinal mouths screaming in unison and lightning rippling faster, it arched its neck back before thrusting its main head into Namu's exposed brain. Hitoshi gagged. He had been suppressing his urge to vomit for as long as he could. He ripped his mask off with feverish hands. Avoiding eye contact, he slid down the decorative hedge wall he was hiding behind, resigning himself to listening to the two monstrosities grapple as his hands weren't enough to block them out. Warbling screams and jumbled words filled USJ, a rapidly quieting gurgling fighting to be heard underneath it. And then, silence. Wiping his mouth clean and replacing his mask, Shinsu peered through the hedge's thick foliage. Almost every centimeter of the cement and brickwork plaza was painted in astonishingly bright red. Shinsu shook his head, lowering his hands from his throat's armor piece. Focusing himself, he could hear the gangly ringleader pacing through blood puddles, blood dripping off his raw neck, accenting the morbid piece of artwork his red shoes were painting. Jagged mumbles fell from his mouth, volume increasing in congruence with his stumbling. Only a few meters from him was an unmoving black mound, and despite the missing gray matter, it twitched violently, fists closing and opening. Laying next to it was the thing that had now not once, but twice, saved him. Its green fur was matted and colored black with drying blood and dirt, its muzzle still predominantly uncovered bone, the holes in its body still showing white. As he watched its chest rise and fall unevenly, the whites of a hole shifted, revealing a human-like eye. Neck hair standing on end, his golden eyes glanced back at the prattling man whose frantic pacing was drawing closer to his savior's restless corpse. Your fault, this all your fault, stupid effing rabid animal. Blood flicked off his hands as they halted their scratching. The green mass was at his feet, its breathing steady but thick with fluid in its throat. Rabid animals like you should be put down. His voice rasped from behind the hand on his face. Static-coated words spat from the green beast's many mouths. Annoying, he reached out a dusty blood-smeared hand toward its pulsing neck, several eyes hidden in its fur glaring at him, pupils pulsing behind a foggy sheen. Itoshi balled his fists and bit his lip, giving his head a frustrated shake before leaping out of the hedgerow. Wait, his voice cracking as his quirk flushed his vocal cords. Hand barely an inch from the animal's neck, the villain paused, red eyes glaring at the puberty-stricken student from behind his hand mask. Itoshi shook out his wrist, thinking, wouldn't it be more beneficial to keep it alive and make it like that thing over there? It beat it so obviously it's like Mora, good. He fumbled over his words, desperately hoping the villain would bother responding this time. The man drew his hand back slightly. His other hand began scratching his bloody neck, mumbles and growls preceding his words. Right without a second word, Hitoshi snapped his proverbial jaws shut, golden eyes lighting up. He let out a gasp. Gotcha. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.